Chapter 620. The spatial distortions continued to expand, and in the blink of an eye, they had already spread out to a range of 10 meters from the two of them. Everything became grotesque and dazzling, and one could only vaguely see the blue sacred moonlight's fists lashing out at the air incessantly, as if wanting to shatter the space before her. The blue sacred moonlight's figure completely encompassed Feng Xingjian. The first prince looked at this scene. Although the prowess of each of her punches and kicks seemed to be no different from that of ordinary conferred knights, he could sense the terrifying power contained in each of the blue sacred moonlight's attacks from the intense spatial distortions, which had expanded to a radius of 10 meters. How terrifying was the power to be able to extend the spatial distortions to a range of 10 meters. Even when the first prince went all out, he could only cause the spatial distortions to appear in the air like water ripples. With such power, a casual punch or kick from the blue sacred moonlight would probably be able to tear the first prince into dust. The first prince said solemnly, "Senior blue sacred moonlight, how long can she last in this state? In theory, it should be limitless. As long as Mingyue Mountain's power isn't depleted, she'll be able to continue on," Lan Yu said with a hint of confidence. At the very least, during this period of time, it's hard to defeat Grandma. Even if the Abyss Lord and His Majesty were to come, they probably won't be able to defeat Grandma in this state. The Tianmin clan's head looked at the blue sacred moonlight, who kept on lashing out at Feng Xingjian, and thought to himself, is this the accumulation of a divine-level expert? As expected, none of the old fellows who attained the divine level before the world's metamorphosis are simple. How much power does one need to have in order to create spatial distortions of such a degree? If she were to punch out at full power, the entire Mingyue Mountain would probably be destroyed. It's a pity that father was beaten to death by Feng Xingjian. If only he could survive. Thinking of this, the first prince looked at Feng Xingjian, who was being lashed out incessantly, and the glee in his eyes grew. Both his son and father had died in Feng Xingjian's hands. How could he not feel hatred and detest him? He had the urge to strangle Feng Xingjian with his own hands. It's a pity, what a pity. I might not be able to exact revenge, even if I were to spend my entire life. However, your arrogance and conceit have caused your death. Feel our anger and hatred, and then die. Amidst everyone's astonished, vengeful, and delighted gazes, the blue sacred moonlight suddenly came to a stop. A myriad of fist shadows dissipated, and she stood before Feng Xingjian. Her fist was grabbed by Feng Xingjian's palm, and her face was filled with astonishment. Feng Xingjian's fist also had layers of spatial distortions. That was the power of the celestial slaying sword formation exploding. Have you had enough fun? Feng Xingjian said calmly, then go and die. As he spoke, Feng Xingjian smashed his fist fiercely onto the blue sacred moonlight's stomach. The violent power passed through the distorted space, and the all-conquering sword force smashed through the blue sacred moonlight's stomach without stopping at all. The blue sacred moonlight's eyes were filled with killing intent. Not caring about the injuries on her body at all, she continued to exchange punches with Feng Xingjian. She lashed out a punch onto Feng Xingjian's forehead, but Feng Xingjian's head merely tilted up slightly. At the same time, he stomped down on the blue sacred moonlight's left leg, breaking it. The blue sacred moonlight tapped out a finger onto Feng Xingjian's chest again. Feng Xingjian's chest sank a little, and he also tapped out a finger onto the blue sacred moonlight's chest, causing it to explode. The blue sacred moonlight's face was filled with craziness, and her entire body was covered in blood. She ignored the injuries on her body and once again lashed out her palm onto Feng Xingjian's chest. Feng Xingjian's body trembled slightly, and then he punched through the blue sacred moonlight's shoulder, sending her broken limb flying out with a smack. An ear-piercing scream rang out from the blue sacred moonlight's martial will. Her entire body shattered once again, but with a flash, she appeared unscathed. She looked at Feng Xingjian, who was still unscathed, in astonishment. Impossible. You've received so many attacks from me, so how can you still be unscathed? How can your physical body be so powerful? How can your attacks penetrate through my defense? Simultaneously, she discovered that she had not managed to escape and was still appearing before Feng Xingjian. What have you done? What power is this? She felt that her entire body was encompassed by streams of auras that were like sharp swords, and she was unable to move at light speed. During the close combat earlier, Feng Xingjian had already made good use of the time to lock onto the other party with the celestial eradication sword formation and wrap her up with sword cheese. This way, you would not have to worry that she would be able to escape. Otherwise, even Feng Xingjian would have a headache if he were to fight against a second-tier divine level expert who could move at close to light speed. Why are there so many questions? Feng Xingjian grabbed the blue sacred moonlight's head and lifted her up like a little chick. I'm stronger than you. It's that simple. As he spoke, Feng Xingjian had already punched through the blue sacred moonlight's head. Violent sword cheese continued to transmit down, crushing the blue sacred moonlight's entire body into dust. Streams of martial will that were like moonlight appeared. The moment they appeared, they were once again smashed by Feng Xingjian's punch, turning into countless starlight that scattered out. However, it was true that the blue sacred moonlight was much stronger than the enraged lion. After being smashed by Feng Xingjian with a few consecutive punches, her martial will continued to tremble, wanting to gather together once again. There were even a few parts of her martial will that flashed rapidly, wanting to escape. It was a pity that she was unable to escape under the encompassing of the celestial eradication sword formation. Feng Xingjian clenched one of his hands in the end, and the power of the sword formation contracted abruptly, compressing the blue sacred moonlight's remnant martial will into a ball of light that floated in his hand. The blue sacred moonlight's face was contorted, filled with terror, fury, and despair as she was clenched in Feng Xingjian's hand. Feng Xingjian threw a glance toward everyone and said, "Is there anyone else who wishes to stop me?" Lan Yu looked at this scene with a pale countenance. Her beautiful face had turned pale from fright, seeing that her grandmother, whom she revered like a god, was being clenched in Feng Xingjian's hand. Her entire view of the world was overturned. This was 10 or even 100 times more the shock and blow that Feng Xingjian had given her when he had defeated her. After being glanced at by Feng Xingjian, how could she still dare to resist? Her body trembled, and she bit her lip, not daring to show any dissatisfaction. The Tianmen clan's head lowered his head, his eyes filled with astonishment. He was deeply astonished by Feng Xingjian's power. This kid is too amazing. How can he be so strong? At this moment, I mustn't go against him. I must hold it in. I must borrow the powers of the other 6 great clans and the Krieg royal family. I must join forces with the powers of our 8 great clans to be able to kill him. Such a person must not be allowed to continue growing. Although he had shown his submission, many schemes kept on appearing in his heart. His eyes were still filled with the vengeance of his son and father having been killed. As if sensing something, Feng Xingjian threw him a glance and said, "You're still not convinced? Then you can die." As Feng Xingjian spoke, sword shadows flashed in void space, and the Tianmen clan's head was slashed into pieces amidst agonizing cries. A furious bellow reverberated in his martial will. "Stop it, Feng Xingjian. I surrender. I've already surrendered. Elder, make a move quickly. Save me." However, Feng Xingjian did not stop at all. Under the Tianmen clan's head's remorseful gaze, Feng Xingjian punched across space and completely crushed the Tianmen clan's head's martial will. Throughout the entire process, the over 10 elders behind the Tianmen clan's head were as quiet as cicadas in winter, not daring to move in the slightest. They did not even dare to look at Feng Xingjian. They stood there in a daze like over 10 wooden men. After doing all these, Feng Xingjian finally turned his gaze toward the first prince. His gaze was ice cold. He suddenly asked, "George Krieg, have you ever regretted making an enemy out of me?" Chapter 6:21. The weather changed, and the mountains and rivers shook. Looking at the strong gales in the sky, and sensing the tremors coming from under their feet, everyone from the battle hall exchanged glances. What happened? There seems to be a battle. Did someone attack Mingyue Mountain? The old man from the battle hall frowned and said resolutely, "What kind of joke is this? The first prince and Miss Lawn, you will be getting married in a few days. Who would come to make trouble at such a time?" Stirring up trouble in such a situation was simply not giving face to Bright Moon Mountain or the entire imperial family, ruining the empire's great plans and committing a crime against the world. Who would dare to do such a thing? After hearing their master's words, everyone present also nodded secretly and felt that their master was right. It was true that the first prince, the blue sacred moonlight, the abyss lord, and the king were 4 divine-level experts in total. Who would dare to cause trouble at the wedding and offend 4 divine-level experts at once? The pressure from 4 divine-level experts. Just the thought of it made one's scalp go numb. Just when the people from the battle hall were thinking about this, the ground beneath their feet trembled intensely again. Sounds of explosions rang out, accompanied by shouts and roars of anger. Even the old man from the battle hall frowned and said in disbelief, "There are really people fighting on Mingyue Mountain." A short moment later, everyone from the battle hall ran toward the mountain peak where the sounds and air explosions were coming from. On the way, they saw countless cultivators and knights rushing toward the mountain peak as well. Most of them were guests who had come to attend the wedding. Right now, all of them were agitated by the sounds of battle and were rushing toward the mountain peak. The disciples of Mingyue Mountain were mixed in with them, but they only made up a small portion of the crowd. They were unable to stop the advancing crowd at all. 1 to 2 minutes later, the people from the battle hall followed the crowd to the battle scene at the top of the mountain. What they saw was the scene of Fang Xingjian subduing the blue sacred moonlight's martial will and crushing the Tianmen clan's head with a single punch. At the start, they didn't manage to react. But as the people in the surroundings introduced each other, the faces of the old man from the battle hall and his disciples were filled with astonishment. "Look, the first prince? Lady Lanyu is also there. The woman who was beaten to death. It can't be blue sacred moonlight. The blue sacred moonlight has been beaten to death. How is this possible? Even her martial will has been taken away. Terrifying, too terrifying. To think that he was still able to kill the blue sacred moonlight despite being besieged by 2 divine-level experts. Who on earth is this man?" At this moment, Fang Xingjian finally turned his gaze towards the first prince. His eyes were icy cold. He suddenly asked, "George Krieg, have you ever regretted making an enemy out of me?" "Regret?" The eldest prince looked at this scene with a gloomy expression and said coldly, "Fang Xingjian, you dare to kill me?" As he spoke, the aura of the lava purgatory surged forth, and a series of dragon roars rang out one after another. 6 lava dragons had already soared into the sky, riding on the indestructible war chariots as they pounced over. Intense aura, boiling blood, and every muscle of the giant dragon sputtered out large chunks of lava, dripping onto the ground and forming pools of lava. Layers of white chi encompassed the heads of the giant dragons. They had broken through the sound barrier and were charging over at supersonic speeds of over 10 times that of supersonic speed. Each of the 6 giant dragons weighed over 10,000 tons. With the 6 of them combined, they were equivalent to an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier that was the size of a small island was charging over at supersonic speeds of over 10 times that of supersonic speed. What kind of prowess was that? Even a mountain would be smashed into pieces from the collision. The aura of the 6 lava dragons charging over at the same time was as if several thousand or tens of thousands of trains were charging over at the same time. Seeing the 6 giant dragons descending from the sky, the people who had rushed over all cried out and retreated. The aura was too terrifying. If the 6 giant dragons were to really charge down, the entire Mingyue Mountain's peak would probably be smashed into smithereens. The mountains would collapse and the earth would crack, destroying the world. However, before the 6 giant dragons could charge far, they saw Fang Xingjian's sword fingers sweeping out. The celestial eradication sword formation was activated once again. Sword light flashed in void space, and an intense, deathly sword intent swept out. Suppress all of them. Amidst the world-shaking, agonizing cries, several tens of streams of sword light tore through the atmosphere, piercing into the heads, backs, and tails of the 6 giant dragons. Dragon blood, dragon scales, and dragon whiskers instantly filled up a large part of the sky. Amidst the agonizing cries, Feng Xingjian's palm pressed down explosively across space, and waves of milky white sword cheese turned into a huge palm that descended from the sky. Right now, the celestial eradication sword formation was in Feng Xingjian's hands, and the energies of the physical particles and ether particles within a range of 100,000 meters were being used by Feng Xingjian in an omnipotent manner. All of you shut up. At the next moment, like a child using his palm to slap loaches, the 6 giant dragons were slapped onto the platform at the top of the mountain. Amidst a world-shaking explosion, a great amount of sand soared into the sky. The mountain peak cracked, and the Mingyue mountain trembled. It was as if a great earthquake had happened within a range of 1,000 lis. When the smoke and dust dissipated, revealing the cracked mountain peak, the 6 giant dragons could be seen sinking into the mountain, covered in blood. It was as if all the bones and internal organs in their bodies had been shattered. Each of the giant dragons had 3 sword lights pierced into their bodies, nailing them to the mountain and rendering them unable to move at all. Everyone looked at this scene in great astonishment. Although it was astonishing that Feng Xingjian had killed the blue sacred moonlight, due to the control of a divine-level expert, the visual effect was far from as astonishing as the scene of Feng Xingjian suppressing the 6 lava dragons. Each of the 6 giant dragons was around 100 meters long and weighed over 10,000 tons. They were like buildings with over 30 floors. Right now, all 6 of them had been suppressed together. It was as if Feng Xingjian had slapped down an aircraft carrier that was flying at over 10 times the speed of sound with a single slap. He was simply invincible. Feng Xingjian. That's Feng Xingjian? What terrifying power in sword arts. What on earth is this martial art? The countenance of the battle hall's old man turned pale as he looked at Feng Xingjian, who was in midair. He was still in a state of great astonishment. Such a sword art? Such a martial art? Is it really something that humans can cultivate? 4 white bone-short swords floated next to Feng Xingjian, and endless sword cheese turned into a light circle that was as thick as a thumb, circling around Feng Xingjian. He stepped on void space and slowly landed before the first prince. Oh, you didn't escape? Thief, now that you've achieved great mastery in your martial arts, I naturally won't be able to escape. I won't do such meaningless things either. The first prince stared at Feng Xingjian and said, but, Feng Xingjian, let me say this one more time. Do you dare to make a move against me in front of so many people? Feng Xingjian looked at him and did not say anything. The entire place seemed to have sunk into silence. This silent atmosphere soon spread out through the entire mountain peak. Countless people gulped, not daring to say anything. They could only watch this scene quietly. The successor of the royal family, the successor of the ancient path of hell, and the first prince who represented the empire's interests. Even if he did not have the strength to truss a chicken, who would dare to make a move against such a person? Not only would he be making an enemy out of the entire empire, but he would also be changing the history of the entire world. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it was as if water was going to drip out. Everyone stared at Feng Xingjian, as if wanting to see if he would dare to make a move. The entire world's history seemed to be going to undergo an overwhelming change because of Feng Xingjian's choice. Chapter 622. The first prince, George Krieg, was the future successor to the empire. Over the past few years, especially during the 3 to 4 months after the world's metamorphosis, the first prince could be said to have been extremely powerful. With a series of alliances and domineering ways, he had taken over almost half of the authority in the various regions of the empire. Behind the first prince were 2 divine-level experts from the Krieg royal family. Even the School of Sword Art's previous supreme chief, one of the 10 divine-level experts, the sword slash of the secular world, had joined the royal family. If one were to make a move against the first prince, they might face the revenge of 3 divine-level experts. The power of a country could bring about endless troubles. Everyone looked at this scene in silence, holding their breaths as if they had even forgotten to breathe. They stared at this scene, which could affect the world's history for several decades in the future. Lan Yu's beautiful eyes were wide open as she looked at Feng Xingjian, who had descended from void space. Various schemes kept on flashing through her mind. To make a move against the first prince in front of so many people. This will mean that he has completely fallen out with the Krieg royal family. Moreover, as the successor to the empire, the first prince will definitely have many life-saving divine weapons and secret arts that he has yet to perform. The reason why he chose not to go all out and instead chose to push Feng Xingjian around is so that he could destroy Feng Xingjian's martial heart. Once he cowers here, a long shadow will probably be left behind in Feng Xingjian's heart, making him feel terrible for the rest of his life. It's not impossible for his martial will to not improve for several decades. Thinking of this, Lan Yu let out a deep breath. However, if he were to make a move against the first prince, it would mean that he has fallen out with the royal family. Once the king and the Abyss Lord set their sights on him, even the current Feng Xingjian would definitely die. Thinking of the extremely unfathomable pair of brothers, the Abyss Lord and the king. Their talent was 10 times that of the first prince's, the resources they received were 100 times that of the first prince's, and the time they had accumulated was also several decades more than the first prince. Just the thought of how terrifying people like them were now caused Lan Yu's hair to stand on end. If I make a move, I'll definitely die. If I don't make a move, my martial will not be smooth, and it'll probably be hard for me to improve. The first prince is really vicious. Lan Yu took a long look at Feng Xingjian and thought, Feng Xingjian, what will you choose? Although the other people present were not clear on the exact power of the divine-level experts, they knew that the Krieg royal family who had ruled the empire for 200 years was not to be trifled with. They were divine-level experts. In Feng Xingjian's palm, the blue sacred moonlight's remnant martial will let out a piercing laugh. Feng Xingjian, what are you going to choose? Do you want me to help you kill George Krieg? If you're willing to let me go, I can help you kill him. You don't have to do it yourself. Feng Xingjian did not say anything. He merely clenched his fist, and it was as if he had instantly squeezed a balloon. An explosive bang rang out from Feng Xingjian's palm, and the blue sacred moonlight let out a series of agonizing cries as it shattered once again. Then it slowly gathered back together. This time around, the gathering process was several times slower than in the past. She also appeared extremely transparent and frail, as if she would dissipate at any moment. Clearly, the blue sacred moonlight's martial will have become extremely weak. This time, after recovering, she did not dare to speak carelessly. She could only glare fiercely at Feng Xingjian, her eyes filled with hatred and resentment. It was obvious that he hated Feng Xingjian to the extreme. Feng Xingjian looked at the first prince and said calmly, If I want to kill someone, no one in the world can change my mind. But as I said before, I won't kill you for the sake of the second prince. I'll just destroy your physical body, wear down your martial will, and cripple your cultivation. At the next moment, amidst everyone's astonished gazes, Lan Yu's widened beautiful eyes, and the first prince's astonished and furious gaze, Feng Xingjian punched out across space, and sword force gushed out from his physical body. Deathly sword intense cut across void space, and a circle of light formed from sword cheese slashed out toward the first prince. In that instant, all sorts of colorful lights lit up. A pitch-black smoke-like light barrier appeared, and the level 29 hell's black light barrier lasted for 1,000th of a second. Then, a white armor appeared before him, and the level 29 divine light armor was instantly torn apart, only hanging on for an instant. Seething hellish flames shot out explosively, colliding with the sword cheese. The level 29 purgatory hellfire rock instantly dissipated. Streams of 7-colored light burst out, turning into a 7-colored divine shield that fended off the attack. The level 29 rainbow, luck divine shield was shattered. Divine weapons shot out one after another, and the divine weapons, which would make one's eyes go red with envy, were shattered one after another by Feng Xingjian. The 27 divine weapons had lasted for less than 100th of a second. Many agonizing cries and furious bellows rang out as the first prince's physical body was pierced through by the endless sword cheese. Amidst the crazy tremors, it was as if he would disintegrate at any moment. Godly ascension, the deathly sword intense trembled fiercely, and the first prince only felt that his body had become light. His martial will have been shaken up from his physical body. The 6 heaven-soaring swords soared intense. The first prince let out an astonished cry, and then he was engulfed and dismembered by countless deathly sword intense. How dare you? How dare you? The first prince's phantom image once again gathered together from his shattered martial will. His martial will turned into a pitch-black human figure that bellowed out toward void space like a demon. Feng Xingjian, do you know what you're doing? Are you going to make an enemy out of the entire world? Feng Xingjian looked at the first prince coldly and said calmly, George, do you still not understand? As he said that, he struck out another punch, shattering the first prince's martial will. What I'm going to do? The first prince bellowed and gathered together, but he was once again shattered by Feng Xingjian with a single punch. No one can think of stopping me. Pure martial will turn into waves of light waves and scattered out in all directions. However, within the celestial eradication sword formation, they darted left and right, darting about at light speed. Other than colliding into the sword cheese time and time again, causing layers of ripples to erupt, they were unable to do anything else. It wasn't possible when you were stronger than me in the past, and it's even more so now that you're weaker than me. Then endless sword cheese started to compress, just like how they had dealt with the blue sacred moonlight. They continued to compress the first prince's martial will that had scattered out in all directions, turning it into a light sphere the size of a palm. The first prince bellowed crazily in the light sphere. His distorted and enraged expression was like that of a demon among demons, and his fury seemed to have materialized. However, Feng Xingjian paid him no heed and punched out once again, scattering the first prince's martial will. He then gathered them together and punched out again, scattering the first prince's martial will. This went on for 5 to 6 times, but the first prince continued to bellow, furiously bellow, and struggle. Although his martial will was becoming increasingly thinner and weaker, he had no intention of begging for mercy. He merely glared at Feng Xingjian with bloodshot eyes, his gaze filled with madness. What kind of person was the first prince? His ambition was to engulf the entire world. He had always wanted to control the world and become the world's top existence. To him, power was something that was even more important than his life. Right now, Feng Xingjian kept on weakening him. It was as if he was peeling off his skin and breaking his bones. It was even more unbearable than killing him. It was only when Feng Xingjian struck his will, until it was like a thin layer of fog, that the first prince finally stopped. Chapter 623. Right now, the first prince's martial will was so weak that it was almost no different from those at the peak of the first transition. He had completely lost the ability to materialize his will, and even his heaven's perception was a little blurry. His cultivation had regressed to an extreme. The first prince gritted his teeth and looked at Feng Xingjian, not saying another word. His entire being was as deep as hell. It was because he knew that no matter what he said, it would be useless at this moment. It was because Feng Xingjian was the same kind of person as him, and it was impossible for him to change just because of other people's words. Feng Xingjian then swung his sword fingers, and a myriad of sword cheese gushed out toward the first prince's physical body. They gathered in the first prince's brain, stimulating a few mysterious spots in his brain. With this stimulation, the aura of the first prince's physical body started to decline at a crazy rate. His brain lost control over his physical body, and his vital energy and blood deteriorated rapidly. His energy also flowed out uncontrollably. Then the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces between the many physical particles kept on being slashed off, and the toughness of his physical body declined rapidly. The first prince's physical body continued to deteriorate. In the blink of an eye, he had regressed from the divine level to a demigod, then from a demigod to an ordinary level 29. Then he continued to deteriorate to the first transition, and finally, from the first transition to an apprentice. The first prince's physical body was suppressed to that of an ordinary person by Feng Xingjian's unparalleled sword arts. Then with a wave of Feng Xingjian's palm, the first prince's martial will return to his physical body. An endless sense of weakness instantly filled up the first prince's consciousness. Right now, the first prince's physical body was about the same as that of an Olympic athlete, and his mental state was at the level of an ordinary soldier in the special forces. He might be able to live in peace and health for the rest of his life, but it was unknown how long it would take for him to cultivate back to tier 1 of the divine level. Waves of weakness and discomfort gushed up in his heart. After cultivating for several decades, how long had it been since he had felt this feeling of being an ordinary person? However, there were no signs of dejection in the first prince's eyes. He merely looked at Feng Xingjian coldly and did not fly into a rage or go crazy. However, it was precisely this calmness that made others feel that he was even more profound. Right now, the first prince seemed to have become even more unfathomable. "It's over," the first prince said calmly. "Then can I leave now?" Feng Xingjian also seemed to be a little surprised at how calm the first prince was. Even with his willpower, it was impossible for him to be as calm as the first prince after having his cultivation crippled all of a sudden and having to start cultivating again. Feng Xingjian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself. Could it be that this isn't his real body? Feng Xingjian suddenly had this suspicion. If this was not the first prince's true body, but just a clone's martial will and a disguised physical body, then it was clear that the first prince had been plotting this for a very long time. By sending a clone over to join forces with the Blue Sacred Moonlight and the Tianmen clan, he would then get them to fight against Feng Xingjian. He could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It would be for the best if Feng Xingjian died. Even if he did not die, he would have gotten rid of one of the major factions in the Tianmen clan, which was one of the 7 great clans, paving the way for the royal family to centralize power. He would also have attracted a great deal of hatred for himself. When the time came for the royal family to deal with Feng Xingjian, they would naturally receive the support of the other factions and great clans. This was like having mountains and rivers in one's heart and great shrewdness in one's mind. It was as if they were using Feng Xingjian as a blade. However, this is nothing. This is just a small scheme. To a world that possesses extraordinary powers, it's still not the key. When Lan Yu saw the first prince's calm expression, she had clearly thought of the possibility of it being a clone. However, if this isn't his clone but his real body, then it would be even more terrifying. Lan Yu looked at the first prince, who was extremely calm, and suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. After cultivating for several decades and attaining the divine level, his powers were then drawn out by his enemy, and he was reduced to a mere mortal. This is like falling from the clouds into a swamp. If ordinary conferred knights were to encounter such a thing, they would lose control of their mental state and might even go crazy. However, this first prince, if this is really his real body, then his mental state is too terrifying. If he were to cultivate with such a mental state, he would be successful in every endeavor. If he were to go back and cultivate with such a mental state, he might be able to achieve even greater things than before. Moreover, he still has his experience and hasn't lost it. The first prince looked at Feng Xingjian with great calmness and continued, "Why? Could it be that you want to kill me? Are you worried about my talent and mental state and want to kill me now?" Feng Xingjian shook his head with an indifferent expression, and his eyes flashed with a hint of chaos. "There's no need for you to agitate me. I've said that I'll let you live, so I'll let you live. If you can't accept this, you can go back and cultivate. If you can cultivate to the point where you can challenge me again, then I'll be looking forward to it. I only hope that you'll be able to take a few more blows from me next time. It won't be like this time, gathering a bunch of useless people and disappointing me." The first prince lowered his eyelids, and his tone became increasingly ethereal. "Don't worry, Feng Xingjian. I won't let you down next time." With that, he turned and left. Just like an ordinary person, he walked out step by step. Wherever he passed by, the crowd would make way for him. Although he had lost all of his powers and had become an ordinary person, the aura he exuded had become increasingly unfathomable. Moreover, the remnant might he exuded was still present, and no one dared to stop him. Lan Yu walked up to Feng Xingjian and asked, "Sir, are you really going to let him go just like that? Aren't you afraid that he'll come back to take revenge after he achieves success in his cultivation?" After going through such a great change, the first princes can be said to have received the best training. I can tell that his mental state is even more unfathomable than before. Moreover, he still has his cultivation experience. He might really be able to cultivate back to the divine level. It's useless. There was a hint of loneliness in Feng Xingjian's tone. Once he's one step behind, he'll always be behind. With the current changes in the world, it'll be too late by the time he reaches the divine level and catches up. With that, he turned to look at this beauty from the Mingyuan mountain and said in a playful tone, "Your master has been crippled by me. Don't you hate me?" "I wouldn't dare to." Lan Yu put on the appearance of a petite lady who was on the verge of tears. She said in a soft and pitiful voice, "Sir, your sword arts are world-shaking, and I'm just a weak young lady. What else can I do? I can only resign myself to fate." However, Feng Xingjian looked at the people from the full moon shrine who were walking over slowly and said calmly, "Your fellow disciples don't think the same way." Several hundred people from the full moon shrine slowly surrounded them. Their eyes were filled with hatred, fear, nervousness, and many other emotions. Feng Xingjian was the person who had supported the full moon shrine and crushed the blue sacred moonlight, just like that. How could they not feel hatred and not want to seek revenge? However, the abilities that Feng Xingjian had displayed had shocked them. However, at a time like this, as long as someone were to instigate them, they might very well go crazy and risk their lives. It would probably be another bloodbath. Chapter 624. Seeing this scene, Lan Yu bellowed, "What are you guys doing?" A girl said, "Sister Lan Yu, what did you do to Lady Blue Sacred Moonlight?" "Shut up," Lan Yu said coldly. Lord Xingjian and grandmother had a fair fight, and the victor was decided. They didn't use any underhanded means. What are you guys trying to do now? Are you guys so sore losers that you gang up on others after losing? Are you trying to throw the face of our full moon shrine? With just a few words, Lan Yu had managed to subdue the people of the full moon shrine, displaying her prestige among the disciples. With just a few words, she had managed to pacify the many disciples. She then looked at the many guests and gave them a slight apology before canceling the wedding and sending off the many onlookers. Throughout the entire process, Lan Yu displayed the responsibility of successor of a major faction. She was magnanimous, and her Tier 1 divine level powers gave her sufficient confidence. Feng Xingjian watched on. It was only after everyone had left that he said in amusement, "You're not bad. The blue sacred moonlight is inferior to you. Given enough time, you'll be able to surpass her." "Sir, you're too kind." Before Feng Xingjian, Lan Yu seemed to have turned into a gentle and weak young lady again. "I wonder how you'll be willing to let grandmother off? Our full moon shrine guarantees that we'll no longer be enemies with you from now on and will fully support the second prince in inheriting the throne. This is what I should do." Feng Xingjian nodded and said, "Other than these, I also want to read through all the manuals in your full moon shrine." A few days later, the news of Feng Xingjian defeating the blue sacred moonlight and crippling the first prince spread out like a tornado. For a period of time, the entire world was shaken, and everyone was so astonished by this news that they felt giddy. No one had expected that Feng Xingjian would be able to do this, nor had they expected that Feng Xingjian would dare to do this. The entire empire calmed down, like the calm before the storm. Everyone knew that it was impossible for the Krieg royal family to let the matter rest now that their successor had been crippled. If it did not do anything, it would be equivalent to admitting defeat to Feng Xingjian. Their reputation would be completely ruined. And how would they be able to continue ruling over the empire? Countless influences and organizations stopped what they were doing. All of them were waiting for the Krieg royal family to take action. However, Feng Xingjian remained in the full moon shrine as if he had not sensed anything, flipping through the manuals of this faction that had been passed down for countless years. As he flipped through the book before him, Feng Xingjian's eyes flashed with a chaotic and indifferent light from time to time. It was like the changes of a universe and the operation of a world, and it revealed an unparalleled mysteriousness. The Krieg royal family hasn't thought of dealing with me yet? Feng Xingjian thought to himself. It's probably because their attention has been placed on the evil god ritual. Summoning the evil god, killing the evil god, and seizing the power within. Once they succeed, it'll be a major event that can change the history of the world. While he was thinking about these, Feng Xingjian's brain was also revolving at high speed. He studied the full moon shrine's manuals, learned the various martial techniques in them, and filled his mind with his sword arts. The full moon shrine's method of condensing one's martial will at the first tier of the divine level was called the Moonlight King physique. It was an existence that condensed one's martial will into the form of moonlight. It might not be very strong, but it had many changes and was extremely agile. It could also freeze all living things in the world. This allowed Feng Xingjian to see another direction in condensing one's martial will, and it provided him with more information to condense his martial will. Feng Xingjian had also read through the cultivation method for the second tier of the divine level, where one's physical body would shatter and one's will would traverse. As for the third tier of the divine level, where one's physical body would be completely converted into ether particles. However, the full moon shrine only had information on cultivating up to the third tier of the divine level. In this aspect, it was indeed much worse than the mystic abyss Heavenly Emperor's legacy. Standing next to Feng Xingjian, Lan Yu seemed to have turned into a maid, pouring tea for Feng Xingjian. She was as close to him as a kitten. Her gaze when looking at Feng Xingjian was filled with gentleness. It was as if she had placed all her emotions on Feng Xingjian. Moreover, she was wearing a long robe with a split in the middle, revealing a pair of slender and fair long legs. They looked as if they were glowing with the color of flesh. If any man were to be treated and observed in such a manner by such a great beauty, they would probably have strange thoughts in their hearts. Moreover, such a beauty was a divine-level expert. This would make one feel an endless desire to conquer her, as well as a sense of satisfaction. However, Feng Xingjian knew that this lady was very scheming. Lan Yu's fawning over her was just a disguise. If Feng Xingjian was an ordinary person, she would have probably smacked Feng Xingjian to death a long time ago. Seeing that Feng Xingjian had put down the manual in his hands, Lan Yu said in a gentle voice, "Sir, do you still want other manuals?" Feng Xingjian smiled and did not say anything. Instead, he looked at the blue sacred moonlight, who had turned into a light sphere and was floating in the air. He asked, "Where's the formation you used the other day?" "I want to take a look." The blue sacred moonlight's expression had been gloomy to begin with, and when she heard what Feng Xingjian said, she was so infuriated that her brows furrowed. "That's a secret of our full moon shrine. We definitely won't let outsiders see it." Feng Xingjian flicked his fingers and said calmly, "You wanted to kill me, and I'm already being very merciful by sparing your life. If you're not going to cooperate, then I can only waste some effort and wipe out the full moon shrine." The blue sacred moonlight's expression kept on changing. However, sensing Feng Xingjian's killing intent, she was unable to say anything to reject him. Lan Yu immediately said, "Grandmother, just tell the Lord. Otherwise, with the Lord's talent, he might be able to discover the profoundness after scanning through the entire Mingyue Mountain setup." The blue sacred moonlight let out a long sigh, appearing very dejected. At the next moment, A tremendous amount of information was sent into Fang Xingjian's mind. It was the contents of the Mingyuan Mountains formation. It included a set of methods on how to absorb the will fragments of ordinary people, store them, and convert them into willpower. Not bad. Fang Xingjian nodded inwardly. With this set of formation, the prowess of the Celestial Eradication Sword formation can be increased by another 10%. It's a pity that the rate at which this formation accumulates power is too slow. Without decades or centuries of accumulation, it won't be able to unleash its true prowess. Just as Fang Xingjian was focused on studying the full moon shrine's manuals, the first prince was sitting in a horse carriage. The muscles throughout his body kept on moving up and down as he silently cultivated his physical body. He was cultivating the training and nurturing techniques that apprentices cultivated from the very beginning. A short while later, the horse carriage came to a stop. Someone helped the first prince down, and they walked into a pavilion. In the pavilion, there was a middle-aged man with a full beard. His long hair draped over his back casually. Although he was dressed very casually, he still appeared to be very graceful and noble. Seeing the first prince's arrival, he pointed to the seat in front of him and said, "Sit." "Uncle." The first prince nodded and sat down. The middle-aged man whom he addressed as uncle was the current sect master of the ancient path of hell and one of the Empire's 10 divine level experts, the Abyss Lord. Looking at the first prince's appearance, the corners of the Abyss Lord's lips curled up slightly, revealing a hint of smile. "Not bad. You don't seem to be dispirited. Why? Are you blaming us for not avenging you?" The first prince shook his head. Although he only had the powers of an ordinary person, he gave off an unfathomable feeling. Even the Abyss Lord felt that it was a little strange. The first prince said, "Father and uncle, of course you have your reasons. Moreover, this is my own vengeance. I'll avenge myself." The Abyss Lord nodded. "In at most 2 months' time, the evil god summoning ritual will begin. You should make your preparations. As for Fang Xingjian, your father has made arrangements for him. You don't have to worry about him for now." Chapter 6:25. In a secret room at the peak of the Mingyuan Mountain, Fang Xingjian's physical body was sitting cross-legged on the ground without making a single sound. His breathing and heartbeat were almost non-existent, as if he was dead. Above his head, a lump of black light and shadow kept on flashing. It was like the ghosts and spirits of legends, twisting and changing incessantly. This was Fang Xingjian's deathly sword intent. After seeing the full moon shrine's Moonlight King physique and the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's Sunluo 6 Heaven Sword physique, he had tried to integrate the 2 methods of condensing martial will to create his own path. With his aptitude of having the world's top sword arts talent and the aptitude of having 10 levels of the mystical prince, it was naturally a piece of cake for him. However, after many attempts, he still felt a little dissatisfied. It's still lacking a little bit of variation. The sturdiness of the Sunluo 6 Heaven Sword physique and the agility of the Moonlight King physique can all be integrated into my heaven-connecting sword physique. However, my martial will still needs to be able to unleash endless power. The method of condensing martial will that Fang Xingjian had created during this period of time was called the heaven-connecting sword physique. He wanted to make this method of condensing martial will have both sturdiness, power, and speed at the same time. However, in terms of power, he was still unable to unleash the abilities of his martial will. The power of the natural world is naturally the power of the stars under our feet. Fang Xingjian thought of the prodigious astral divine powers waves that he had cultivated in the past, as well as the Terra ingurgitation technique. It'll be great if my martial can make use of gravity, or even if my celestial eradication sword formation can also make use of gravity. It was true that the power of the stars, or gravity, was one of the strongest powers in the world. However, Fang Xingjian had not obtained the related method of condensing martial will. It was not impossible for him to create his own method. However, he thought of a better idea. Fang Xingjian walked out of the secret room and saw Lan Yu, who was kneeling at the side. He asked, "Are you familiar with the Myriad Stars Palace? Do they have any powerful methods of condensing martial will?" During this period of time, Lanya had been accompanying Feng Xingjian. She appeared to be extremely obedient, just like a maidservant. In fact, Feng Xingjian knew that if he said it out loud, she might even offer herself to sleep with him. This was a woman who would do anything to achieve her goals. She had nothing to do with the kind and gentle appearance she had. Lanya was a little puzzled as to why Feng Xingjian would ask this. However, as a powerful faction that was also established in the Xingwu region, like the Full Moon Shrine, Lanya was naturally very familiar with the Myriad Stars Palace. She nodded and said, "All of the Myriad Stars Palace's legacies come from a universal astral realm book. The method they use to condense their martial will is called the astral spiritual physique. It gathers the geomagnetic forces in martial will, and its power is the most vigorous and majestic." Feng Xingjian nodded and thought to himself, so that's how it is. As a faction that represented the stars, the Myriad Stars Palace would naturally have martial arts that allowed them to grasp the powers of the stars. Feng Xingjian said, "Then let's go. Bring me to the Myriad Stars Palace." Lanyu said hesitantly, "Sir, you're thinking of taking a look at the Universal Astral Realm book." The Myriad Stars Palace was over 1,000 lis away from the Full Moon Shrine. They were located on the east and west sides of the Xingwu region. In the center of a huge hill was a mountain that was over 1,000 meters tall. The mountain looked like a huge rock that had been thrown onto the ground. In fact, it was very close. It was because this mountain was rumored to have been a shooting star in the sky. Countless years ago, the experts of the Myriad Stars Palace had grabbed it from the starry sky and thrown it onto the land of the Xingwu region. Therefore, a stretch of mountain range was blasted into a huge crater, and after countless years, it became the hills that it was now. The shooting star turned into a huge mountain, constantly emitting streams of weak astral radiation. It supported the cultivation of the generations of knights of the Myriad Stars Palace, and it was known as the Xingwang Mountain. Right now, with the Xingwang Mountain as the center, the countless towns and villages in the hills all belong to the Myriad Stars Palace's businesses. It could be said that the Myriad Stars Palace was the true local tyrant here. The words of the Myriad Stars Palace's knights were much more effective than those of the Empire's officials. Right now, at the foot of the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain, several tens of people of various appearances were waiting quietly, waiting for the Myriad Stars Palace to summon them. They were the representatives of the various trade associations, factions, and various organizations within the Myriad Stars Palace's sphere of influence. These representatives would often come here to ask for instructions from the Myriad Stars Palace, request for assistance, or pay a visit to a supervisor of the Myriad Stars Palace, or present gifts. A cute young lady of about 14 or 15 years of age, with blonde hair tied into a ponytail and a round face, was also standing there. Next to her was a middle-aged man who looked somewhat similar to her. The middle-aged man said to her, "Maria, remember this. After you go up to the Xingwang Mountain, you must work hard in your cultivation and listen to teacher. Don't casually create trouble. There are too many important characters on the mountain, and our clan can't afford to offend any of them." The young lady who was called Maria nodded and said seriously, "I understand, father. I'll work hard in my cultivation." Maria's father had put in a lot of effort, spent several 10,000 gold, and almost depleted all of his resources before finally finding a disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace who was willing to take his daughter in as an apprentice. As long as she could join the Myriad Stars Palace, she would be able to do whatever she wanted within a range of 100 lis. Moreover, there is also the Myriad Stars Palace's martial arts legacy, which was a supreme manual with a limitless future. At the thought of this, Maria's father looked at his daughter, Maria, with eyes filled with anticipation. Just as everyone was patiently waiting for the summons from the Myriad Stars Palace, a man and a lady appeared at the foot of the mountain. Maria rubbed her eyes, looked at the man and lady, and said in astonishment, "Father, were the two of them there earlier? Why didn't I see them appear?" Maria's father shook his head indicating that he had not seen how the two of them had appeared either. It was a man and a woman. The man looked ordinary, even a little pale and skinny. The woman, on the other hand, looked graceful and charming. However, she was looking at the skinny man with a tender and sweet expression, causing many of the men present to feel an instinctive displeasure. The man and lady were Feng Xinjian and Lan Yu. Lan Yu said in a gentle voice, "Sir, this seems to be the Myriad Stars Palace. From today onward, there's no need to call me sir." Feng Xinjian's eyes flashed with a vast aura that seemed like the circulation of a universe. There's a difference in strength between people, but there's no such thing as superiority or inferiority. Regardless of whether it's me or you, we're just a speck of dust in the long river of time. You could just call me Feng Xinjian. He then looked at Lan Yu and asked once again, "Are you sure this time around?" Lan Yu's face turned red, and she stuck out her tongue a little embarrassedly, causing one's imagination to run wild. "I'm sorry, Xing Jian. I don't come out often, and I'm not too familiar with the terrain either. However, this should be the Myriad Stars Palace. I'll just ask around." As she said that, she turned to look at the people waiting at the foot of the mountain. Her expression changed from one of tenderness to one of coldness. "Is this the Myriad Stars Palace?" Chapter 626. Seeing how Lan Yu had turned around to ask questions, most of the men present felt giddy. It was because she was too beautiful. There were not many beauties like Lan Yu even in the entire empire. Among the many beauties Feng Xinjian had seen before, only Audrey, who came from the northern ice region, could be a match for her. Therefore, after hearing Lan Yu's words, the few men immediately fought to be the first to reply, "Yes, yes, yes. This is the Myriad Stars Palace. Why has Miss come to the Myriad Stars Palace? My uncle is a disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace. If there's anything, he might be able to help." It was a pity that Lan Yu did not even throw a glance at them. She looked at Feng Xinjian and said obediently, "It should be here." Seeing how she was treating Feng Xinjian so amiably, it was as if she was a completely different person from how cold she was earlier. This made everyone feel even more displeased with Feng Xinjian. Feng Xinjian nodded and said, "Let's go up and take a look." With that, he walked toward the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain gate. Lan Yu said hesitantly, "Go up? Sir, Xinjian, aren't we going to inform them?" Feng Xinjian seemed to be exuding an indifferent aura, giving off a feeling that he was becoming more and more illusory. He said calmly, "It's too troublesome to report our names right from the start. Let's take a look first." Lan Yu was stunned for a moment before she reacted. She threw a somewhat sorrowful glance at the Myriad Stars Palace. For Feng Xinjian to go up without reporting his name, it was as if he was intentionally trying to scam the Myriad Stars Palace. Only someone with Feng Xinjian's abilities and reputation would be able to do something like this. If ordinary people were to do this, they would probably be suppressed to death by the Myriad Stars Palace. Lan Yu shook her head and followed Feng Xinjian toward the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain gate. She even changed her appearance slightly. The tip of her nose, the corners of her eyes, and her lips had some slight changes. Although there was not much of a difference, no one would be able to associate her with Lan Yu's identity. It was because a dark joy suddenly rose in her heart. It was not a bad thing for the Myriad Stars Palace, their old rival, to be scammed by Feng Xinjian. However, they had only taken a few steps when a person who looked like a young master blocked their way. The man wore black and red formal attire. Every button and ring on his body exuded an air of nobility. His short, black hair was combed neatly. Walking up to Feng Xinjian, he bowed slightly, putting on an aristocratic etiquette. He wore an elegant and polite smile as he looked at Lan Yu and said, "Beautiful miss, you can't barge into the Myriad Stars Palace recklessly. You'll have to queue up to be summoned before you can enter. My uncle is the palace's third-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace." What Young Yu said. After the man finished speaking, he still had a confident and superior smile on his face, doing his best to display his aristocratic demeanor. All of his attention was focused on Lan Yu. If I were to miss out on such a beauty, I'll probably not be able to come across her again in my lifetime. The young master threw a glance at Feng Xingjian from the corner of his eyes, and he felt even more superior. Even this guy is able to get close to this beauty. My advantage should only be greater. However, just as he was thinking this, Lan Yu threw him a cold glance and said, "Scram." The aristocratic young master was stunned for a moment, as if he could not react to Lan Yu's change. "Young miss, you might have misunderstood." A short moment later, the aristocratic young master frowned. "I'm only giving you a friendly reminder. Why must you speak so viciously to me?" Just then, Feng Xingjian suddenly turned his head in surprise and looked at the golden-haired young lady, Maria. A hint of a strange gleam flashed in his eyes, which were like glazed gemstones. Under Lan Yu's astonished gaze, Feng Xingjian slowly walked up to Maria and touched Maria's head. Throughout the entire process, an aura that was like the circulation of the heavenly laws and the vast universe extended out into the surroundings. Everything seemed so natural. Everyone looked at this scene in a daze, as if everything was as it should be. No one stepped out to stop it, not even Maria's father. Feng Xingjian looked at the dazed Maria and suddenly asked, "Young lady, are you interested in becoming my student?" "Huh?" As Feng Xingjian spoke, that vast aura immediately dissipated without a trace. Maria seemed to have reacted to it. She immediately shook her head and said, "No way, no way. I'm here to become a disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace. I can't be your student." Maria's father also reacted to it. Although it was obvious that Feng Xingjian and Lan Yu were not ordinary people, in this middle-aged man's opinion, no matter how powerful they were, how could they possibly be a match for the Myriad Stars Palace? Therefore, he rejected politely yet firmly, "I'm sorry, sir. Maria has already made an appointment with a teacher from the Myriad Stars Palace. I'm afraid that she won't be able to be your student." Feng Xingjian shook his head. "It's fine. I was just struck by a sudden impulse." Feng Xingjian was right. It was true that he had been struck by the sudden inspiration and had followed his feelings to want to take Maria in as his disciple. As for why and what kind of benefits there would be, he himself was unable to say for sure. Ever since he had gained the sudden inspiration ability, Feng Xingjian had encountered many such situations. He would be able to sense some of the specific situations, while he would only have a blurry feeling for others. However, there would usually not be any harm in following his feelings. Lan Yu walked up to Feng Xingjian, and her marshal kept on scanning Maria's physical body. It was as if she was curious about what this little girl had done to make Feng Xingjian take the initiative to take her in as his disciple. Hearing Maria's and the middle-aged man's replies, Lan Yu shook her head, exclaiming that the two of them had eyes but failed to see, not caring about the treasure before them. Hearing that aristocratic young master smirked coldly. "Hee, there are all sorts of people who cheat and swindle in this world. She's a genius who's going to join the Myriad Stars Palace. Can you not hold up her future?" Feng Xingjian looked toward that aristocratic young master, but the other party glared back at him without showing any signs of weakness. "Why? Am I wrong? You're still thinking of snatching a disciple from the Myriad Stars Palace? How audacious of you." Recalling how Lan Yu had treated him with disdain earlier, he vented all his fury onto Feng Xingjian. Just then, an elderly female voice rang out from the mountain. "That's right. It's really audacious of you to snatch a disciple from our Myriad Stars Palace." The first word was still vague and illusory, but the last word was already close at hand. A middle-aged woman wearing a blue robe with countless silver spots of light flickering on it, just like starlight, descended from the sky, bringing with her a strong gust of wind. Maria's father said in pleasant surprise, "Master Crystal, you're here?" "Maria, quickly greet the master." Maria nodded somewhat cautiously. Chapter 6:27. That lady nodded a little arrogantly toward Maria's father, but her eyes were still looking sideways at Feng Xingjian. She said, "Young man, don't be so arrogant just because you have some abilities. Who is your master? Today, I'm going to teach you a lesson on his behalf so that you won't keep spouting nonsense outside. If that happens, you won't even know how you died." Everyone present looked at Master Crystal with great respect, but when they looked at Feng Xingjian, they sighed inwardly. He was bragging at the foot of the Myriad Stars Palace's mountain, and he just so happened to be caught by the Myriad Stars Palace's second-generation disciple. He was really extremely unlucky. The Myriad Stars Palace's several generations of disciples were constantly being replaced. The current first-generation disciples referred to the Myriad Stars Palace's divine-level expert, the astral ancestor, as well as his peers. The second-generation disciples referred to people like Crystal. This was especially so for Crystal. She was the astral ancestor's disciple. Thinking of how such an important character was going to come down personally to receive a female disciple who had yet to join the sect, everyone immediately turned their gazes to Maria, who had been inconspicuous previously. It seemed that this girl might be an important character in the Myriad Stars Palace in the future. That aristocratic young master also smiled inwardly and shook his head, sighing inwardly at Feng Xingjian's bad luck. What a pitiful kid. To think that he wants to take in a future female disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace as a student right in front of the Myriad Stars Palace. I really don't know if he's ignorant or foolish. This old woman is famous for her violent temper. I think that even if this kid doesn't die, he'll be in deep trouble. Everyone shook their heads and sighed. The middle-aged and elderly people were already planning on telling this matter to their juniors when they went back. They would have to be careful when they were outside in the future. Otherwise, they would end up like this young man, offending the Myriad Stars Palace just because of a single sentence. This was a ready-made example of bad luck. Feng Xingjian threw a glance at Crystal and shook his head. You're getting on in years, and you're not even a demigod. It seems that you haven't learned much, but you have quite a lot of stupid rules. Crystal's eyes opened abruptly like an enraged lion. Her aura surged, and everyone in the surroundings could sense killing intent gushing toward them. Maria's father felt bitter inwardly. Is this kid courting death? How could he offend a level 29 powerhouse like this? Damn it, I must explain it clearly to the Grandmaster later. He must not take his anger out on Maria and affect Maria's future. Feng Xingjian looked at Crystal coldly. As soon as Crystal unleashed her raging aura, Feng Xingjian's palm had already pressed on her shoulder. With a loud bang, the female knight who was awe-inspiring just a moment ago was now like a toy. She knelt on the ground as if her body had fallen apart. Her face was flushed, and the air around her surged as if she was struggling to stand up. At the same time, Feng Xingjian's voice softly sounded in her ears. If you're not convinced, then kneel until you are. In that instant, the ground under Crystal's knees shattered inch by inch, and she sank 3 inches into the ground. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on her as she knelt down before Feng Xingjian. Forces surged throughout her body, but she was unable to move at all. Her eyes were bloodshot from agitation, but she was still unable to move her muscles at all. She felt as if her physical body had been separated from her consciousness, and she could only kneel there silently. As a second-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace, Crystal was used to being arrogant and domineering in the Xingwu region. When had she ever been forced to kneel down? This level of humiliation was as if a knife had pierced fiercely into her heart. She glared at Feng Xingjian, wanting to say something, but realizing that she was unable to say a single word. She could only continue to stare at Feng Xingjian, as if wanting to carve Feng Xingjian's appearance deeply into her mind. However, she was nowhere in Feng Xingjian's heart. He did not even remember her name or appearance. His actions were so casual, but the people around him were shocked to the core. Although everyone was a little surprised at the abilities that Feng Xingjian had displayed, they were even more astonished that he had actually attacked and humiliated a second-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace. This guy has gone mad. To think that he would attack someone from the Myriad Stars Palace here. This be *starred. If the old ancestor were to pin the blame on him, even we might have to be punished. Everyone looked at Feng Xingjian in both fear and fury, feeling that they were really unlucky to have gotten involved in such an undeserved calamity. However, Feng Xingjian did not care about what these people were thinking. He merely turned and walked toward the Xingwang mountain. Lan Yu followed behind Fong Xingjian like an obedient maid. It was only then that the young master who had mocked Fong Xingjian earlier broke out in cold sweat. Thankfully, Fong Xingjian did not seem to think much of him and did not make a move against him. Otherwise, with his abilities that were not even at the second transition, he would have been killed with a single slap. However, at the thought of how Fong Xingjian and Lan Yu had disregarded him, he felt even more aggrieved and furious. The crowd at the side had already surrounded Crystal, wanting to help her up. Master Crystal will help you up. It's all that wild kid who came from God knows where. Master, please don't blame us. We don't know him at all. However, no matter who went up and how much strength they exerted, they were unable to budge Crystal at all. A stream of deathly sword intent from Fong Xingjian was left on Crystal's body. It was like an empty tie pressing down on her. It was not a power that they could go up against. Just then, a fatso at the side was so anxious that he was drenched in sweat. He said, "What should we do now? Should we chase after them and take a look?" Chase after them and take a look? That kid seems to be an expert. What if they end up fighting and we end up getting injured? Do you guys think that everything will be fine just by waiting here? Maria's father's countenance was grim as he looked at Crystal, who was still kneeling down and not moving. He said calmly, "Maria, follow me to stop that guy. We mustn't let him humiliate the Myriad Stars Palace." With that, he dragged Maria and chased after them. The few people at the side were stunned for a moment. Some of them reacted and gave chase as well. A few of them also reacted and shouted, "We'll stay here and take care of Master Crystal." The aristocratic young master raised his brows and thought, "That's right. We're all considered to be external influences of the Myriad Stars Palace. It's one thing if we can't fight them, but it's another thing if we don't put in any effort. That kid is courting death. He'll definitely die in the Myriad Stars Palace. No matter what, we must chase after him and put on an act. Otherwise, if we were to be accused of being incompetent or having ulterior motives, we'll be the ones to suffer." Therefore, the young master's eyes flickered and he chased after Fong Xingjian. "Humph, to dare to create trouble in the Myriad Stars Palace. I want to see how you're going to die." Fong Xingjian and Lan Yu walked slowly on the mountain path. The two of them could sense the people who were following them from a few hundred meters behind them, but neither of them paid any heed to them. Lan Yu was just waiting to watch a good show, while Fong Xingjian had half of his attention on cultivating his sword arts. How could he possibly care about what those people were thinking? Chapter 6:28. After the two of them had walked up over 300 steps, an explosive bellow rang out, accompanied by several tens of tornadoes descending from the sky. "How dare you barge in?" Before the words were finished, Fong Xingjian slapped out across space with his palm. There seemed to be a crackling sound ringing out, and the silhouette in the tornadoes tumbled in midair, turning into a black, but in midair and flying out for an unknown number of kilometers. The people in the forest behind them felt their hearts palpitate. Maria's father gulped and said, "That person seems to be the Myriad Stars Palace's third-generation disciple. Arts? Superstar God Arts can be considered an outstanding talent among the third-generation disciples. His talent is above that of Crystal's, and his abilities even surpass hers. To think that he can't even take a single attack from him?" Everyone exchanged a glance and subconsciously put over 100 meters away from Fong Xingjian. After casually slapping away a few more disciples who were on guard, Fong Xingjian and Lan Yu did not encounter any more enemies. They walked to the mountainside of Xingwang Mountain without any obstructions and saw several tens of Myriad Stars Palace's disciples standing guard in the huge training ground. The two men and one woman in the lead had seething auras, and there were faint auras of over 1,000 specialty seeds seething in the surroundings. The physical particles in their bodies were linked up by violent heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces, and their strength far surpassed that of ordinary conferred knights. Fong Xingjian threw them a slight glance. With how powerful his martial will was, checking out the trio's abilities was as easy as reading the lines on his palm. He instantly determined that the three of them were probably demigods with 1 or 2 tiers of perfection. The 2 men and 1 woman were the 3 most outstanding second-generation disciples of the Myriad Stars Palace. The oldest among them had the nickname of the Lone Star Knight. He was a demigod with 2 tiers of perfection in his physical body and specialty seeds. He would be able to dominate in any region. Beside him were his junior martial sister, the Stardust Fairy, and his junior martial brother, the Star Beast Hunter. At the sight of Feng Xingjian and Lan Yu, the Lone Star Knight's countenance changed slightly as well. Lan Yu's beauty was so great that even he could not help but feel astonished. Moreover, Lan Yu gave off a familiar feeling. However, when he tried to sense it in detail, it was very blurry and he could not get a clear feeling. However, someone had barged into Xingwang Mountain and several of their disciples had been injured. No matter what, they could not just let this matter rest. The Lone Star Knight walked out, looked at Feng Xingjian, and said, "May I know who you are? Why did you barge into our Myriad Stars Palace and injure our disciples?" The Star Beast Hunter at the side laughed coldly, and the marble-like muscles on his body twitched. Many wild beasts formed from starlight roared uneasily behind him. "Eldest senior brother, why are you wasting your breath on him? Just kill this kind of person. There's no need to talk so much." The Lone Star Knight threw a fierce glare at him, and then turned to look at Feng Xingjian. It was true that he had the best temper and was the most level-headed out of the 3 of them. Even if Feng Xingjian were to come knocking on their door, he would still want to get to the bottom of Feng Xingjian's background first. In his opinion, as long as Feng Xingjian was not a fool, it would be impossible for him to come knocking on their door like this. For Feng Xingjian to dare to come knocking on their door alone, he must have some sort of backing. It was just that their Myriad Stars Palace was not afraid. The Stardust Fairy said proudly, "You're the one who sent a letter saying that you want to challenge our Myriad Stars Palace, right? To think that there's really someone with such guts. Tell us who you are, or who the person behind you is, and we can spare your life." However, Feng Xingjian flicked his fingers and frowned slightly. The other party seemed to have mistaken him for someone else. However, he did not mind and merely said calmly, "I don't know who you're talking about. There's no need for you to ask for my name, nor do you need to know who I am. The reason I've come to the Xingwang Mountain today is to borrow the Universal Astral Realm book to take a look. As long as you let me take a look, I'll turn around and leave." Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, many of the Myriad Stars Palace's disciples present were infuriated. What was the Universal Astral Realm book? It was the Myriad Stars Palace's secret manual, the source of all the martial arts in the Myriad Stars Palace. It was something that only the Myriad Stars Palace's leader could read. For an outsider to just casually come over and want to borrow it to take a look was no different from someone peeing on the Myriad Stars Palace's signboard. If they were to let someone read the Universal Astral Realm book so casually, then the people from a Myriad Stars Palace would no longer be able to go out in the future. They would be utterly humiliated. The Lone Star Knight thought that he was already very polite, but he was still so infuriated by the other party's words that his face turned pale. He let out a cold laugh in a restrained manner and said calmly, "The Universal Astral Realm book is our Myriad Stars Palace's secret. It's impossible for us to lend it to outsiders. 3 days ago, you sent a letter over saying that you want to challenge our Myriad Stars Palace. Yet now, you're saying that you want to borrow our Myriad Stars Palace's secret, the Universal Astral Realm book? Are you really going to fight to the death with our Myriad Stars Palace? Is that so?" "I'm not the one who wrote the letter. I just came here on a whim." Feng Xingjian's eyes emitted waves of indifferent aura. It was as if there was some kind of terrifying power slowly emerging from his body. The feeling that he gave off also changed from his originally weak and harmless appearance to an indescribable sense of danger. "There's no point in talking too much. In the end, we'll still have to fight to see who's stronger. Then take a sword attack from me. With so many of you joining forces, if there's someone who can take a sword attack from me, it's nothing much for me to let the Myriad Stars Palace off." Hearing this, the Lone Star Knight and the others from the Myriad Stars Palace felt that Feng Xingjian was extremely arrogant and putting on airs. How many people were there here? There were several tens of the most elite disciples. Among them, there were over 20 who had reached the second transition, 7 or 8 who had reached level 29, and the Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Starbeast Hunter. The 3 of them were demigods with 2 or 1 tier of perfection. With such strength, they would be able to stir up a storm in any of the great regions. They would even be more than enough to set up a first-rate faction. The Stardust Fairy looked at Feng Xingjian with an amused expression and said, "Defeat us with a single sword attack? Who do you think you are? The Abyss Lord or the Holy Orison?" It was not just the people from the Myriad Stars Palace. Even Maria's father, and the others who were following behind felt that Feng Xingjian's words were extremely arrogant. To be able to defeat 3 demigods and over 10 conferred knights with a single sword attack. Probably only a divine-level expert would be able to do this. Maria's father took a long look at Feng Xingjian and said, "This person is either a lunatic who is so arrogant that he's ignorant or a divine-level expert." "Divine-level expert?" Maria cried out in astonishment. "Father, you're saying that he's a divine-level expert. It's just a 1 in 10,000 possibility." When Maria's father said this, he also smiled. How can there be such a coincidence? Recently, the ether particle density has been increasing tremendously. There's no lack of arrogant young geniuses. Feng Xingjian's expression became increasingly indifferent, as if no one could attract his attention anymore. He said calmly, "Between the Abyss Lord and the Holy Orison and me, we'll only know who's stronger and who's weaker after we fight. All right, cut the crap. Take my sword attack." The Stardust Fairy still wanted to say something, but as a deathly sword intent rose up from Feng Xingjian's body, the countenances of the Stardust Fairy, the Lone Star Knight, and the Starbeast Hunter instantly changed drastically. Chapter 629. Deathly sword intents rose up from Feng Xingjian's body, piercing into the sky like an invisible sharp sword. An intense sense of danger spread out from the hearts of the Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Starbeast Knight. It was as if the killing aura had taken the form of a material blade, slicing past the surface of their skin. Roar! In almost an instant, the 3 of them unleashed their full powers. A Stardust phantom image rose up behind the Lone Star Knight. It was a meteor that seemed to have descended from the heavens, wanting to collide into the ground, destroy everything, destroy the human world, destroy society, and restart the entire biosphere. The Lone Star Knight pushed out fiercely with both hands, and a majestic amount of energy gushed crazily into the phantom image from his body. In the blink of an eye, the phantom image became extremely material, as if it had really turned into a world-destroying star, smashing out toward Feng Xingjian. A terrifying power tore through the air currents, and a charred smell permeated the air. This was because the atmosphere had been heated up and seethed. The intense power seethed to and fro, as if wanting to shatter the entire training ground into dust. The Stardust Fairy made her move, and a myriad of starlight flashed. The endless starlight seemed to have turned into a myriad of galaxies that seethed and gushed out toward Feng Xingjian. This astral tempest was something that Feng Xingjian had performed when he was fighting against Holt, a third-generation disciple of the Myriad Stars Palace, during the regional selection. It was a killing technique that was condensed from the bone cells that cultivators eliminated on a daily basis. However, when the Stardust Fairy performed it now, it was more than 1,000 or even 10,000 times more powerful than when Holt had performed it back then. Everywhere they passed by, there would be a state of acceleration of time, as if the universe was changing. Each flickering starlight was equivalent to a level 29 divine weapon, and they pierced through at 10 times the speed of sound, capable of piercing through a mountain. Right now, they were sweeping out toward Feng Xingjian like a meteor shower. How world-shaking would their prowess be? It was as if several hundred bombers were to bombard him repeatedly, and it was sufficient to flatten the city. Even the foundations would be swept clean. On the other side, the Astral Beast Hunter also made his move. Many wild beasts flashing with starlight behind him roared out in unison. These astral beasts were all substances that he had condensed using astral energy and astral radiation. Each of them had a strength of several tens to over 100 tons, and they could break through sound barriers at a speed that could easily tear steel and penetrate through city walls. A total of 18 star beasts was enough to flatten some small countries. However, this was only the star beasts' weakest ability. Their most terrifying ability was that they could self-destruct. Once they self-destructed, it would be equivalent to the explosion of a gravity bomb. The gravitational force in their bodies would instantly explode, and it would be able to condense all matter within a range of 100 meters into the size of a rice grain. The destructive power would be able to threaten demigods with 5 tiers of perfection. Right now, 18 astral beasts were charging toward Feng Xingjian, preparing to self-destruct. Once they self-destructed, their prowess would stack up against each other, and even some weaker divine-level experts would not dare to take them head-on. The reactions of the myriad stars' palace's 3 great disciples were far too fast. Almost at the moment they sensed danger, they attacked at full power. Moreover, they coordinated with each other, with the Lone Star Knight's World Annihilation Star as the main attack, the Stardust Fairy's Astral Tempest as the support, and the 18 Astral Beast attacks were the true killing moves. The trio's attacks, state, and coordination seemed to have reached a perfect state. With this attack, the 3 of them seemed to have truly connected their minds, and they even had a feeling. This time around, even a Tier 1 divine-level expert wouldn't be able to take our combined attack head-on. However, faced with the trio's attacks, there was no hint of panic on Feng Xingjian's face. There was still only the coldness of circulating the heavenly Tao and looking down on the world of mortals. Feng Xingjian opened his mouth slightly and blew out a mouthful of air. At the beginning, the white air currents were very light. However, at the next moment, they turned into a violent tempest and then eventually condensed into a long sword that was like a waterfall. It brought along strong gales and pierced out toward the trio, exhaling cheese to form a sword. The Lone Star Knight was the first to react to what the other party was doing. However, such an attack only made him feel disdain. Using powerful lung strength to exhale and exhale air currents to form sword cheese? It's fine if you're using this against ordinary people, but you're just courting death by using it against us. Both the Stardust Fairy and the Star Beast Hunter had an intense look of disdain flashed in their eyes when they saw Feng Xingjian's attack. They did not believe that he would be able to take on their joint ultimate attack just by relying on the power of his lungs' exhalation. However, they did not know that Feng Xingjian had formed a sword with a single exhale. Not only did it contain the explosive power of his lungs, but it was also mixed with his deathly sword intent that had reached 800 points. Therefore, at the next moment, the white air currents collided fiercely against the Lone Star Knight's World Annihilation Star. The star shattered, and the Lone Star Knight spurted out blood as he retreated. Strong gales swept out against the Stardust Fairy's Astral Tempest, and a myriad of stardust fell. They were blown out of the atmospheric layer by Feng Xingjian with a single breath. As for the 18 astral beasts, they were swept by the strong gales before they could self-destruct. Each breeze was like an invisible sharp sword, dismembering the 18 astral beasts one by one. They turned into stardust that scattered into the air. White air currents gushed out, but the Lone Star Knight, Stardust Fairy, and Star Beast Hunter were all dumbfounded. They had forgotten to resist and just watched in a daze as the air currents passed through their bodies and swept toward the mountain behind them. They had never imagined that the combined attack of the 3 of them would be so easily countered by the other party. When the Star Beast Hunter saw the 18 astral beasts turning into stardust, a hint of savagery flashed in his eyes. He immediately recovered from his astonishment, let out an enraged bellow, and was about to attack once again. However, at the next moment, the Xinglong mountain under his feet trembled fiercely, and loud kacha-kacha sounds rang out behind him. It was as if the void space was trembling and the tectonic plates of the land were breaking apart. The Star Beast Hunter turned to look, and his pupils instantly contracted. He saw a scene that made his soul fly out of his body. The white air currents that Feng Xingjian had blown out traversed across the sky, sweeping through the hills and colliding with the mountain peaks in the distance. Amidst loud and crisp sounds, the mountain peaks broke apart, and countless cracks appeared in the ground, extending out for several tens of kilometers. With a final rumble, the strong gales and air currents slashed and uprooted 3 mountain peaks consecutively. They were then blown up into the sky at rapid speed, eventually turning into a black dot and disappearing from everyone's sight. Blowing 3 mountain peaks into the sky with a single breath? How terrifying was this scene? It caused everyone present to turn pale and their hearts to tremble. The Star Beast hunter, who had wanted to risk his life earlier, stood there as if he had lost his soul. His countenance was pale, and not a hint of blood could be seen on his face. It was as if he was an ordinary person who had been scared out of his wits. For a demigod expert to be scared out of his wits, what kind of astonishment must he have gone through? They were not the only ones who were astonished. Even Lan Yu, who was also a divine-level expert, was astonished. Uprooting 3 mountain peaks with a single breath, flying into the sky and out of the cloud layers. Such a thing was clearly something that was only heard of in ancient myths and legends. However, it had actually happened right before her eyes. How could she not be astonished? Her evaluation of Feng Xingjian immediately rose by a few levels. As for Maria and the others who had come up with Feng Xingjian, they were completely scared out of their wits. Chapter 630. Maria rubbed her eyes and said in a daze, "Father, were there 3 mountains flying in the sky earlier?" Maria's father's mouth was still agape, and he did not reply for a very long time. It was only when Maria shook his arm that he closed his mouth, swallowed his saliva, and said, "Blowing away 3 mountains with a single breath? Only a divine-level expert would be able to do something like this." He looked at Feng Xingjian's lonely back view, and his eyes were still filled with disbelief. To think that he's a divine-level expert. Suddenly, a thought flashed across his mind like a bolt of lightning. He opened his mouth wide and mumbled, "This power. He looks so young, and he's also a divine-level expert. Feng Xingjian? Could it be that he's Feng Xingjian?" The Empire had 11 divine-level experts on the surface, but now that the first prince had been crippled, there were only 10 divine-level experts left. Other than Feng Xingjian, these 10 divine-level experts all had middle-aged or elderly appearances. Although they could transform into any appearance, they would usually find it beneath them to do so. They would just maintain their original appearances out of habit. Amongst the 10 divine-level experts, the only one who could match up to this scene was Feng Xingjian. Moreover, it was rumored that Feng Xingjian had been browsing through the many manuals in the Full Moon Shrine. At the thought of how the young expert before them was Feng Xingjian, how he had asked his daughter if she wanted to acknowledge him as her master, and how he had been rejected. At the thought of these, Maria's father's countenance was instantly filled with bitterness. He felt that even his saliva had become bitter. Lowering his head and looking at Maria, who was still in a daze, he smacked his lips and sighed. He thought, Maria still doesn't know what she has missed out on. I only hope that she won't blame me in the future. As for the representatives from the various influences and organizations behind Maria and her father, they were all so scared that their countenances turned pale, and they could not even say a single word. Especially when they heard Maria's father's muttering judgment. Huge waves surged in their hearts, and they even rejoiced. Fortunately, I didn't follow suit just now. Otherwise, I'd be dead. I heard that Feng Xingjian is a vengeful person. He didn't even spare the first prince and the undying Xia. Luckily, we didn't offend him. Phew, to think that it's Feng Xingjian. I had initially heard that he defeated the blue sacred moonlight and crippled the first prince single-handedly. I had thought that the rumors were exaggerated. But looking at it now, this person is truly terrifying. Truly terrifying. As the crowd sighed, they intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the nobleman standing at the side. Their eyes were filled with schadenfreude and pity. The nobleman's back was drenched in cold sweat, and his legs were trembling slightly. His heart seemed to be entangled with endless regret and fear. He bellowed furiously in his heart, "Damn it! Damn the Myriad Stars Palace! Damn Feng Xingjian! Since you're so amazing, why didn't you just announce your name? Why didn't he attack directly? You, aren't you just screwing us over?" Right now, the scene of Feng Xingjian blowing away 3 mountains with a single breath was still lingering in his mind. The flying mountains kept appearing in his mind, bringing with it an increasingly deep sense of regret. He could only keep on praying that Feng Xingjian would not remember him. Simultaneously, the Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Star Beast Hunter also reacted. They had already guessed Feng Xingjian's identity. The Lone Star Knight took a long look at Feng Xingjian and said, "You're Feng Xingjian, right? You're really amazing. To be able to blow away our joint attack with a single breath, using pure strength to go up against the astral radiation and stardust forces. It's already extremely difficult. After that, you even managed to slash off several leaves of mountains, uproot them, and blow them into the sky. This is even more difficult. There probably aren't more than 10 people in the world who can do something like this." Feng Xingjian said calmly, "Now that the world's metamorphosis has happened, these means are nothing. In the future, there will only be more and more people in the world who can do this." The Lone Star Knight nodded. "You're right. At this moment, the quality of the Myriad Stars Palace's 3 great disciples could truly be seen." When the Stardust Fairy and the Star Beast Hunter saw the scene of Feng Xingjian blowing away mountains with a single breath, they were completely scared out of their wits. They no longer had the arrogance they had earlier when facing Feng Xingjian. They did not even dare to speak loudly. It was as if they were ordinary people who were very close to a great white shark. On the other hand, the Lone Star Knight, who had been more polite earlier, was still able to converse normally with Feng Xingjian despite his slightly pale countenance, rapid heartbeat, and nervous gaze. He displayed an extremely outstanding mental quality. It was true that cultivating with such mental qualities would yield twice the results with half the effort. Therefore, he was the strongest out of the 3 of them. The Lone Star Knight said, "With your abilities, it's true that the Myriad Stars Palace isn't a match for you. However, if you want us to hand over our secret manuals, we'll be deceiving our master and letting our ancestors down. How about this? Please me, our master." Feng Xingjian had already felt that it was strange that the Myriad Stars Palace's divine-level expert, the astral ancestor, had yet to appear even after Feng Xingjian had caused such a ruckus. Right now, the Lone Star Knight seemed to be speaking in a secretive manner, making him feel even more strange. Could it be that something has happened to the astral ancestor? Feng Xingjian did not have a good impression of this veteran divine-level expert. After all, the astral ancestor had once stood on the First Prince's side during the lawsuit against the rebirth sword technique, proving that there was something wrong with the rebirth sword technique. The 2 of them still had some grudges between them. However, how could Feng Xingjian possibly be afraid of the astral ancestor? Feng Xingjian nodded and said, "Then let's meet him." The Lone Star Knight made an inviting gesture and then looked in Lan Yu's direction. Right now, Lan Yu had already returned to her original appearance. Looking at the Stardust Fairies, Star Beast Hunters, and the others' infuriated gazes, Lan Yu chuckled and said, "You guys know about our full moon shrine situation. I won't be able to stop Xingjian if he wants to do anything." As she spoke, she followed after Feng Xingjian. However, after taking a few steps, she suddenly turned and threw a glance in the direction of Maria and the others. She smiled softly, like 100 flowers blooming. Then she turned and left. The aristocratic young master, who had been feeling very anxious earlier, felt his entire body turn cold. He trembled a few times and then dropped to the ground. His cultivation had been crippled by Lan Yu. Clearly, other than being beautiful and powerful, this beautiful lady was also a petty and vengeful woman. However, after the aristocratic young master sensed his condition, he heaved a sigh of relief. His cultivation had not been much to begin with. So what if his cultivation had been crippled? As long as he could continue living, he would at most need to spend over 10 years to train back up. It would be fine as long as he was alive. The pressure that Feng Xingjian had given him earlier had been too great. Feng Xingjian and Lan Yu headed into the depths of Xingwang Mountain under the accompaniment of the Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Star Beast Hunter. As for the other disciples, they had been sent away by the Lone Star Knight and the others. Chapter 631. As they walked, the Lone Star Knight and the other two continued to exchange information currents through their martial will. The Star Beast Hunter said, "Eldest martial brother, are we going to bring him to meet Master just like that? Are we really going to give him the universal Astral Realm book?" The Stardust Fairy said, "What else can we do? This Feng Xingjian is 10 times, or even 100 times, more terrifying than the rumors say. Who among us can win against him?" She recalled the scene of Feng Xingjian moving the mountain earlier and still felt an instinctive fear. But the Star Beast Hunter was still unwilling to accept this. "This is too cowardly. If I were to hand the universal Astral Realm book to him today, I won't have the face to leave the mountain in the future." The Lone Star Knight sighed and said, "All right, he might not be able to get it either." Thinking of the current situation on the mountain, an unfathomable gleam flashed in the Lone Star Knight's eyes. "If he can get it even under such circumstances, then we'll just let him have it." After that, they did not say anything. The three of them walked to the side of a cliff and saw an old man sitting cross-legged on the cliff. Less than half a meter in front of him was a 10,000 zhang tall cliff. Waves of thick fog churned about, as if it contained an endless amount of mysteries. The old man had a head full of white hair, turbid eyes, loose skin, and a few spots of age spots on his face. He looked just like an ordinary old man in his 60s. However, his eyes were fixed on the endless clouds as if they contained all the secrets in the world. Looking at the old man's state, Feng Xingjian's eyes narrowed, and a hint of doubt flashed in his gaze. This is the astral ancestor? However, even the arrival of Feng Xingjian and the others did not seem to attract the old man's attention at all. His eyelids did not even change in the slightest as he continued to watch the changes in the sea of clouds. "That's right, it's Master," the Lone Star Knight said with a bitter smile. "It's true that the increase in the ether particles' density increases the speed of people's cultivation. However, it contains too much personal information and increases the possibility of people going astray in their cultivation. When Master was striving for the 3rd tier of the divine level, he wasn't able to resist the invasion of personal information. His memories were in a mess, and he only knows how to cultivate instinctively." Lan Yu was slightly stunned. In the next moment, she looked at the old man who was sitting cross-legged in shock. A trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. With the world's metamorphosis, the density of ether particles had increased tremendously. Many conferred knights had improved by leaps and bounds, but at the same time, there were even more people who went berserk, becoming lunatics or comatose. It was not that she had never encountered such cases when she was at the Full Moon Shrine. However, this was the first time she had seen a divine-level expert go berserk to such an extent. At the thought of how Feng Xingjian was attempting to strive for Tier 3 of the divine level, Lan Yu suddenly understood. The Astral Ancestor and the Blue Sacred Moonlight were characters from the same generation and had risen up from their respective sects at about the same time. They dominated the Xingwu region and had also fought against each other many times, experiencing many open and covert fights. However, most of the time, they were evenly matched. If it was not because of the two of them fighting against each other, it would not have been impossible for the Xingwu region to have become independent from the Empire over 10 years ago. After so many battles, the two of them knew that their talents, wisdom, strength, and luck were basically equal. It was basically very difficult to eliminate the other party. Therefore, after both of them attained the divine level, they basically did not fight against each other anymore. They did not even meet each other. The Blue Sacred Moonlight attained Tier 2 of the divine level after the world's metamorphosis. Therefore, Lan Yu had always speculated that the Astral Ancestor should also be at Tier 2 of the divine level. However, the Astral Ancestor was clearly a little eager for quick success and tried to strive for Tier 3 of the divine level within a short period of time, exceeding the limits of his abilities. This was why he went berserk, his memories became chaotic, and he ended up in his current state. The path of cultivation was filled with too many hardships. Even if there were no external enemies, there would still be all sorts of difficulties. Thinking of this, Lanyu shook her head, sighed, and said, "Then he'll just keep sitting here?" "Yes." The Lone Star Knight smiled bitterly and said, "Ever since Master's memories went berserk, he's been sitting here every day, watching the changes in the sea of clouds. It's fine for us to get close to him, but once we want to talk to him, or even get within 1 meter of him, we'll be sent flying or even attacked by Master." Feng Xingjian looked curiously at the divine-level expert who had gone berserk. This was the first time he had seen a divine-level expert who had gone berserk and had his memories gone berserk. Under normal circumstances, when a divine-level expert's will had condensed into a material state, it would be impossible for the external world's personal information to get the upper hand, or for their memories to go berserk. The other party's situation was definitely related to him, striving for Tier 3 of the divine level. Feng Xingjian was very curious and interested in such a situation. The Lone Star Knight said, "If you want the Universal Astral Realm book, we won't be able to give it to you even if we want to. It's because the Universal Astral Realm book has always been kept by the sect leaders of each generation, and it's with Master. Therefore, if you wish to obtain the Universal Astral Realm book, you'll have to get it from Master yourself." Feng Xingjian looked at the Lone Star Knight's gaze, as if he could see through the latter's thoughts. He knew that the Lone Star Knight was already very afraid of his strength, but he was still unwilling to hand over the contents of the Universal Astral Realm book. Moreover, the original copy of the Universal Astral Realm book was with the Astral Ancestor. Right now, the Lone Star Knight was probably still unwilling to accept this and wanted to see if the current Astral Ancestor could suppress Feng Xingjian. After all, the Astral Ancestor had strived for Tier 3 of the divine level previously, and his cultivation was no small matter. During this period of time, we've tried all sorts of methods, but we can't even get close to Master, the Lone Star Knight thought. Master's current strength might already be extremely close to Tier 3 of the divine level. He might even have attained Tier 3 of the divine level, but his memories are in a mess. Although Feng Xingjian is very powerful, Master might still be able to suppress him. At the thought of this, the Lone Star Knight looked at Feng Xingjian with a gaze filled with anticipation. The Stardust Fairy, Star Beast Hunter, and the others all had a hint of anticipation in their eyes. They did not display their thoughts and objectives, and there was no need for them to conceal them either. Therefore, Feng Xingjian could see through them clearly. Smiling, Feng Xingjian walked toward the Astral Ancestor, who was seated cross-legged. At the sight of this scene, Lanyu's countenance also turned grim. No one would underestimate an expert who could strive for Tier 3 of the divine level, no matter what kind of situation he was in. Then let me talk to him. As Feng Xingjian slowly walked toward the Astral Ancestor, the latter did not show any reaction at the start. However, just as Feng Xingjian took a step into a 1-meter radius from the Astral Ancestor, the Astral Ancestor's body suddenly shot out a myriad of starlight. He turned his head, and there seemed to be endless streams of stars flowing in his eyes. He slapped out a palm, bringing along waves of power that could distort space as he grabbed out toward Feng Xingjian's head. Chapter 632. The power that the Astral Ancestor displayed, right now, was to distort space. With a grab, the space was distorted like the atmosphere, and his palm was filled with strange lights. It was as if the entire world was shattering into pieces. Earlier on, when the Lone Star Knight and the other 2 demigods joined forces, their power was enough to shake the Xingwang Mountain. However, it was not enough to distort space. The power of the Astral Ancestor's casual palm strike was enough to distort space. However, he condensed the spatial distortions into one and sent it flying toward Feng Xingjian. With this, Feng Xingjian understood that there might have been a problem with the Astral Ancestor's memories, causing him to turn into a fool. However, there were no problems with his martial arts cultivation. This technique of distorting space and condensing power was not much different from the blue sacred moonlights, or even a little stronger. Faced with the explosive pressure from the astral ancestor's palm strike, Feng Xingjian's countenance did not change. He neither retreated nor gave way. Instead, he pushed out his palm and pushed it out toward the astral ancestor's palm with a prowess that could support the heavens. The violent power also distorted space, bringing about layers of stacking ripples as it clashed against the astral ancestor's arm. Bang! There seemed to be a myriad of thunderbolts ringing out in void space. The Lone Star Knight and the other two demigods turned pale, and fresh blood flowed out from their eyes, ears, mouths, and noses. They were sent flying backward. Even Lan Yu's body trembled. Although she did not retreat, her countenance turned slightly pale. Their palms separated the moment they came into contact. Feng Xingjian let out a stifled snort and retreated 3 steps. The space around him trembled intensely, distorting into a series of fragmented ripples. It was only then that he came to a stop. Oh, the power of this old man's martial will is so strong. Is this the astral spiritual physique? As expected of a technique that dominates with strength. Feng Xingjian sensed the power unleashed by the astral ancestor, and a hint of satisfaction flashed in his eyes. Seeing the scene of Feng Xingjian being pushed back, the eyes of the Lone Star Knight and the others lit up with excitement. It could be said that this 3 steps back was the first time since Feng Xingjian had come up the mountain that he was at a disadvantage. There's hope. There's really hope, the Lone Star Knight thought. As expected, Master's cultivation hasn't regressed. Instead, it's increased. He might really be able to suppress Feng Xingjian completely. The corners of the Stardust Fairies and the Star Beast Hunter's eyes also revealed a hint of joy. Could it be that Master has already succeeded in striving for Tier 3 of the Divine level? In this case, he can definitely suppress Feng Xingjian. It couldn't be helped. The pressure that Feng Xingjian gave them was too great, and it was the kind of strength that they couldn't resist at all. At this moment, when he showed signs of weakness, they felt endless hope. Lan Yu also frowned slightly and thought to herself, it seems that although the astral ancestor's memories are in a mess, he hasn't lost his martial arts instincts. He might become even stronger by focusing wholeheartedly on cultivating martial arts. Feng Xingjian is still too rash. After all, he is an expert who has strived for Tier 3 of the Divine level. Even if he has become a fool, he mustn't be underestimated. Thinking of this, her eyes were full of schemes, and she even thought of a problem. If the astral ancestor really suppresses Feng Xingjian, should I make a move? Against whom? Feng Xingjian. An extremely strong impulse slowly gushed up in her heart. Just as the newcomers present were pondering, the astral ancestor turned his head completely, and the starlight in his eyes became even more dazzling. He has the prodigious demolition sword technique, rebirth sword technique, white bone sword physique. There are also a few light swords and a move that can be used in many sword techniques. The astral ancestor's countenance did not change, and his mouth did not move. He was like a puppet as he spoke through his martial will. Good sword arts. You could be ranked in the top 5 amongst all the swordsmen in the world. Take another move from me, Astral River Shatter. He then stood up abruptly, putting his palms together and raising them high up. Waves of endless majestic force were emitted from his body, and the surrounding void space flashed with starlight. At this moment, the astral ancestor seemed to have turned into a star, emitting endless gravitational waves and causing the space within several tens of meters around him to distort. This astral river shatter brazenly changed and made use of the surrounding gravitational forces, incorporating the violent astral gravitational forces into martial arts and displaying an extremely terrifying destructive prowess. The astral ancestor's palms, which were put together, had turned pitch black like a pitch black sphere. Under the stacking gravitational forces, they crazily absorbed the surrounding air, forming strong gales that filled up the sky. It was as if his body had first turned into a planet, and then the planet exploded and collapsed into a black hole. This astral river shatter simulated the astronomical phenomena in the universe. Countless amounts of sand and plants were absorbed. However, it was like a bottomless pit, and there was no moment when it would be filled up. Even the sunlight that shone down from the sky formed a spiral shape and shot into the astral ancestors' palms. It was as if even light rays were being engulfed. Looking at the black hole-like thing between the astral ancestors' palms, everyone's countenances changed. It was because the astral ancestors' attack was too ferocious, and the astral powers had been utilized to an extreme. Moreover, the black sphere emitted waves of intense that seemed to engulf everything in the world and stir up the world. It made the Lone Star Knight and the others feel that everything before them had been encompassed by that black sphere. It was as if even their martial wills were seething and about to be absorbed into it. As more and more matter was engulfed, the suction force of this move became increasingly stronger. When this astral river shatter was performed, it could compress the entire Xinguang mountain into the size of a thumb. It could even absorb and crush the martial wills of demigods. Even the martial wills of divine-level experts would not be able to come into contact with it casually. Its prowess was extremely powerful, let alone that it was being used toward Fang Xingjian at full power. The Astral River Shatter is one of the 3 great secret moves in the Universal Astral Realm book. However, no one has been able to learn it for over 1,000 years. I didn't expect that Master would end up comprehending the profoundness of this move when he was striving for the 3rd tier of the divine level and only knew how to cultivate. At the sight of this scene, the Lone Star Knight's eyes were filled with great elation. It said that this move was created when the starry sky still existed back when an almighty existence observed the birth and destruction of the starry sky. It imitates the state of the universe's changes and the starry sky's destruction. We've won. The Lone Star Knight was not the only one. The Stardust Fairy and the Star Beast Hunter sensed the terror of the Astral River Shatter, and the word "we've won" appeared in their minds. Faced with this ultimate move from the astral ancestor, Fang Xingjian finally displayed his true abilities for the first time on Xinguang Mountain. For streams of light flashed, and 4 white bone longswords pierced out from Fang Xingjian's ribs. They formed a cross and floated behind Fang Xingjian's back. In an instant, the celestial eradication sword formation possession mode was activated. Within 100,000 meters, regardless of whether it was the powers of ether particles or physical particles, all of them gushed into Fang Xingjian's body like a seething river. Faced with the astral ancestor's full power attack, Fang Xingjian activated the sword formation and then grabbed out with his palm. His pure white palm seemed to have a dreamy color to it. Wherever it passed by, layers of stacking ripples would appear in the space, and particles would collide with each other as if nuclear fusion would erupt at any moment. This palm gave off a feeling of majesty and greatness, as if it represented a type of extreme power. Under the astral ancestor's dazed gaze, Fang Xingjian's palm grabbed onto the black sphere that was formed from the stacking of countless gravitational forces and then squeezed with a boom. The space seemed to have been crushed by this squeeze, and there seemed to be countless cracks flashing in the air. The black sphere, which could condense the area within a range of several tens of lis into the size of a thumb, was crushed by Fang Xingjian's squeeze. The violent gravitational forces exploded wildly in Fang Xingjian's palm, but they were clenched in his palm, unable to break through in the slightest. Amidst the explosive gravitational forces, Fang Xingjian's palm was pushed open slightly. Then he exerted force without changing his expression, and the terrifying gravitational waves in his palm were completely extinguished. Chapter 633. Under the astral ancestor's astonished gaze, Fang Xingjian's palm continued to stretch out, pressing down on the astral ancestor's head. Then he pressed down fiercely. Under the reinforcement of the celestial eradication sword formation, The powers of the ether particles and physical particles within 100,000 meters gathered into streams of sword cheese, condensing both inside and outside Fang Xingjian's body. Under the reinforcement of the myriad of sword cheese, Fang Xingjian pressed down on the astral ancestor's head and smashed it into the mountain with a loud boom. Violent powers distorted the space, turning the space within a range of over 100 meters into a blur. Waves of powers kept on spinning and rebounding along the distorted space, eventually taking effect on the astral ancestor's body. Only a small portion of them seeped out, shattering the mountain under the astral ancestor's feet. The mountain within a range of several hundred meters was smashed into smithereens, turning into countless shattered rocks that soared into the sky and rolled into the sea of clouds. The Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Star Beast Hunter looked at this scene with their eyes and mouths agape. They watched as the astral ancestor was slammed into the ground by Fang Xingjian's palm without being able to resist at all. The distorted space seemed to have become like frosted glass. It was only after over 10 seconds after Fang Xingjian retracted his hand that things slowly calmed down. Right now, the astral ancestor's eyes had already rolled back, and he had lost consciousness as he fell among the shattered rocks. His brain had been completely shattered by Fang Xingjian, and his martial will had been torn apart by endless sword cheese. It had been slashed into dust by the all-conquering sword that could slash through light rays and martial will, and it was currently slowly reassembling. With a single thought from Fang Xingjian, a manual on the astral ancestor's body floated before him. The manual had a glazed color and was actually a pure crystal-like stone. However, densely packed words were carved into it. It was the Myriad Stars Palace's secret manual, the Universal Astral Realm Book. The Lone Star Knight put out his palm like he wanted to stop Fang Xingjian. However, the exchange earlier was still fresh in his mind. He could only put down his palm helplessly and say with a sigh, "Mr. Fang, Master." Fang Xingjian held onto the Universal Astral Realm Book and scanned through the words with his martial will. Hearing that, he said calmly, "I've shattered his head and martial will. Right now, he's reassembling them. If he's lucky, he might be able to recover. If he's unlucky, he'll probably still be in the same state." Hearing this, the eyes of the Lone Star Knight and the other two lit up. To be honest, the move that Fang Xingjian had just displayed had extinguished any thoughts of continuing to struggle. The strength that Fang Xingjian had displayed was simply too strong and invincible. At this moment, they even had such a thought in their minds. Even Master couldn't withstand a single move from Fang Xingjian. Could it be that this Fang Xingjian is truly invincible? The Stardust Fairy looked at Fang Xingjian and suddenly felt that this young man was very pleasing to the eye. Lan Yu also stared at Fang Xingjian from the side. Her mind was still filled with astonishment from Fang Xingjian's earlier move. Fang Xingjian retreated for the first time. This means that although the power of his martial will is strong, it's still not comparable to the astral ancestors. However, ever since those four swords appeared, his sword cheese have become countless times stronger. And to think that his sword cheese are able to slash through martial will directly. Such sword techniques are too terrifying. Lan Yu kept on calculating Fang Xingjian's abilities. Sword cheese that have been strengthened by several hundred or thousand times, in addition to sword techniques that can slash through martial will. Are these Fang Xingjian's trump cards? At this moment, Lan Yu made an important decision. I must not make an enemy out of this person. I'll probably have to give up on taking revenge on him. However, Fang Xingjian was engrossed in reading the Universal Astral Realm Book. The cultivation of astral radiation and astral forces was truly unfathomable, and the in-depth research into gravity far surpassed that of Earth's technology. This caused Fang Xingjian to be deeply immersed in it, unable to extricate himself. He sat down in a stretch of ruins, and streams of gravitational waves emitted from his body. He started to cultivate the Universal Astral Realm Book right on the spot. At the sight of this scene, everyone present exchanged glances. Lan Yu shook her head helplessly. Back when she was at the Full Moon Shrine, she had already witnessed Fang Xingjian's drive for cultivation. He could cultivate at any time and place, regardless of the situation or time. Lan Yu waved her hand and said, "You guys can bring Senior Astral Ancestor away to rest. I'll just watch over him." The Lone Star Knight and the other two nodded and carefully helped the Astral Ancestor away. There was a hint of hope in their eyes. If their master could return to normal, then there would still be hope for the Myriad Stars Palace. The three of them left with the Astral Ancestor, leaving behind only Fang Xingjian, who was focused on his cultivation, and Lan Yu, who was standing at the side. The Lone Star Knight had also issued a ban, forbidding anyone from rushing over. Fang Xingjian was completely immersed in the profoundness of the Universal Astral Realm book. The first thing he was researching, or rather, the main thing he was researching, was the Myriad Stars Palace's method of condensing martial will and forging a conjured physique, the astral spiritual physique. Everything in the world is affected by astral powers, and the astral powers that receive the greatest influence are naturally the powers of the planet under our feet. This force is also known as gravity, and many others. The astral spiritual physique was the process of changing the balance of the gravitational forces in one's body, making use of the Earth's gravitational force, and combining it with one's martial will to forge a conjured physique. Once one succeeded, one would be able to condense gravitational forces with one's martial will, just like what the Astral Ancestor had done earlier. One would be able to use one's martial will to condense gravitational forces and make use of it to display endless divine prowess. Each and every move would have endless power, and as one's martial will grew, the gravitational forces that one could control would also become increasingly stronger. With this method integrated into Fang Xingjian's sword arts, he could once again increase the prowess of his deathly sword intent and the destructive prowess of the celestial eradication sword formation. After one day and one night, Fang Xingjian let out a long exhale. Countless rocks and sand in the surroundings floated up as if they had lost their gravity. Gravitational forces are everywhere. Moreover, they're a type of power that has the strongest effect on space-time. Although the Universal Astral Realm book's explanation of gravitational forces was extremely profound, it was just right for Fang Xingjian. The Astral Ancestor would need to research for several decades, or over 100 years, but Fang Xingjian was able to understand it with just a little bit. When he recalled what he had learned in the past, he was even able to verify it with the Universal Astral Realm book. Actually, the Supreme Chief's Astral Obscurity Sword is an application of gravitational forces. This is why it's able to pass through spatial gaps and achieve such an effect. The same goes for my infiltrating void sword. Its essence is gravitational forces. Countless sword light flashed in Fang Xingjian's eyes, and his physical body suddenly weakened. Then black sword intense swelled up and darted out from his body, turning into a black longsword that soared up into the sky. The black longsword continued to condense, distort, and take on a physical form. Its shape also became increasingly clearer. It was a black longsword that had a total of 4 sides. Each side was inscribed with the words infiltrating void, light pursuit, all-conquering, and instant, respectively. The moment the longsword took form, waves of overwhelming, killing aura gushed out. A series of thunderous sounds rang out in the sky. It was as if the entire world was shocked by this killing aura. At the next moment, the longsword paused slightly and dashed out toward the sky. At the sight of this scene, Lan Yu was surprised. He's going to condense his martial will? That's not right. He's going to condense his martial will while striving for the 9-tiered heavens to attain the 2nd tier of the divine level? This is too crazy. Chapter 634. He had successfully condensed his martial will. Fang Xingjian had finally created his heaven-connecting sword physique by combining his sword arts cultivation, the Mountainous Seas Book of the Way, the Mystic Abyss Heavenly Emperor's Manuals, the Full Moon Shrine's Manuals, the Universal Astral Realm Book, and other profound theories from various sections. Right now, he had left his physical body and dashed out toward the sky. He immediately felt free and unrestrained, as if he could do as he pleased. Humans had always been restricted by their physical bodies. There were too many limits to the physical body, but there were no limits to the heart. Right now, Feng Xingjian was moving around in the sky purely with his martial will. It was like an electromagnetic wave, a light wave, or an infrared ray, piercing through the sky and piercing through the clouds at a speed of close to 300,000 kilometers per second. Is this the feeling of moving around the world with one's martial will and doing as one pleases? Feng Xingjian exclaimed inwardly. It's no wonder that the manuals say that some people in history gave up on their physical bodies in the process of cultivation, existing purely in the form of their martial will. This feeling of being able to do as one pleases and move at light speed is too great. However, Feng Xingjian also knew that although the temptation of existing purely in the form of one's martial will was great, there were also unavoidable side effects. It was just like how Feng Xingjian could sense that even though he had condensed his martial will into the heaven-connecting sword physique, he would still be losing power at every moment. He would need to replenish the energy from the ether particles in the air. With the continuous replenishment, one's martial will would gradually be tainted by the impurities in the ether particles. Of course, the stronger the martial will, the slower the rate at which it would be tainted. However, as time passed, the cultivators would eventually become impure, and their cultivation would regress. On the contrary, if one's martial will were to be maintained in the physical body and receive the nourishment from the vital energy and blood of the physical body, the physical strength would be continuously converted into martial will. The power would then be much purer. Moreover, the second tier of the divine level required one to reconstruct their physical body after condensing their will into a conjured physique, allowing the will and the physical body to merge into one and freely transform. Only then would one be able to strive for the third tier of the divine level. Therefore, the physical body was still very important. Abandoning the physical body would allow one to gain a momentary advantage, but what they would lose would often be their entire future. Even if he wanted to snatch someone else's physical body, it would mean that he would have to cultivate the other party's physical body to the divine level before it would be compatible with his will, and he would be able to continue cultivating. A series of thoughts flashed through Feng Xingjian's mind at lightning speed. In an instant, he pierced through the atmosphere and arrived in outer space. Lowering his head, he could see that the ground beneath his feet had turned into a sphere, and a huge star had appeared beneath his feet. As expected, the miracle world is also a planet. Feng Xingjian then looked up into the sky and saw that amidst the vast darkness, there were layers and layers of invisible ether particles encompassing the entire planet. They were invisible and incorporeal. Ordinary people would not be able to detect them, and they did not affect the sunlight. However, they contained tremendous energy. In the eyes of cultivators, especially divine-level experts, it was as if there were countless worlds encompassing the planet in layers. The heaven-connecting sword physique that Feng Xingjian had turned into shattered abruptly and then turned into several hundred thousands of smaller, heaven-connecting sword physiques. Each of them seemed to be material and had four sides. They were exactly the same as the larger heaven-connecting sword physique from before. These small swords were pieced together one after another like countless building blocks, once again forming the appearance of Feng Xingjian. Clenching his fists, Feng Xingjian sensed that the body formed from his martial will was agile, and filled with endless power. He clenched his fists casually, and violent gravitational forces seethed in his body. In addition to the eternal sword seigneur's sword prowess and sword force, Feng Xingjian's current destructive prowess and power far surpassed the limits of ordinary Tier 1 divine level experts. Lifting his head to look at the sky, the dense ether particles seemed to have turned into material, encompassing the entire outer space. There were 9 layers of such ether particles, and they were the so-called 9-tiered heavens. With each breakthrough, one would be able to level up. It was rumored that one would be able to surpass the divine level and surpass the entire miracle world after breaking through the final layer. Fang Xingjian sensed the seething power in his body and broke into a faint smile. With a dash, he barged into the first 9-tiered heavens. Fang Xingjian darted in fiercely. From the outside world, there seemed to be nothing there. However, under Fang Xingjian's senses, a tremendous amount of information gushed into his consciousness. All sorts of visual, auditory, tactile, and olfactory information created a world that only divine-level experts could see. In Fang Xingjian's eyes, the empty outer space had turned into a myriad of golden, auspicious clouds under his feet. With their wills being torn apart and their bodies being crushed, Fang Xingjian seemed to have dashed into layers of military formations. He charged to and fro, striking out across space with his fists, crushing many souls of the dead. Chapter 635. Each time Fang Xingjian killed a soul of the dead, he would be able to sense that the other party's martial will would turn into pure energy and gush into his body. His martial will was growing bit by bit. 805, 812, 819, 834. Fang Xingjian continued to charge forward, killing countless souls of the dead. Even the heaven-connecting sword physique sent him a feeling of fatigue. Suddenly, his vision cleared up, and he had pierced through the army of the dead at the first level of the 9-tiered heavens. His martial will had also reached 906 points in this series of battles. The first level of the 9-tiered heavens required one to kill all sorts of Tier 1 divine level experts in history. With each victory, one's martial will would be replenished and strengthened until it was extremely strong. When it reached its limits, the martial will would gradually start to turn into flesh and blood, clearing the first level of the 9-tiered heavens. At the thought of this, Fang Xingjian let out a long bellow and once again charged into the army of the dead. Right now, Fang Xingjian and the heaven-connecting sword physique were far too powerful. Each of his punches and kicks carried the concept of annihilating all living things in the world, as well as the power to overturn rivers and seas. Not a single one of the myriad of souls of the dead could fend off a single move from him. Ordinary Tier 1 divine level experts would probably have to be very careful when facing so many souls of the dead. They would have to fight as they moved, slowly strengthening and growing their martial will as they cleared this stage. They would not be able to be like Fang Xingjian, charging and killing as he pleased. After a few rounds of battles, the number of souls of the dead got increasingly lesser, and Fang Xingjian's martial will had also increased to 1,089 points. Just as he grabbed out with his claw once again and tore a bellowing world annihilation heavenly lord into dust, Fang Xingjian's gaze suddenly froze, and he looked toward a corner of the army of the dead in a daze. The person who had appeared, there was an old lady with white hair. She was thin yet tall, and her hair was combed neatly. She was Li Shuanghua. Fang Xingjian opened his mouth, feeling a little dazed. The first tier of the 9-tiered heavens should be all the Tier 1 divine level experts who have existed in history. Could it be that Li Shuanghua is here because she came to Miracle World before? Although Fang Xingjian thought this, he kept feeling that the answer was not that simple. However, the other specters didn't care about what he was thinking. While he was still in a daze, dozens of specters had already rushed to his body, crazily beating, biting, and colliding with Fang Xingjian's heaven-connecting sword physique. Get lost! Fang Xingjian bellowed, and the power of the heavenly sword physique burst forth. Surging gravitational waves blasted out like waves, distorting the space within a radius of over 100 meters. The light also disappeared, turning the area into complete darkness. After killing this batch of undead, Fang Xingjian once again looked in Li Shuanghua's direction. You're not even my match when you're alive, let alone when you're dead. Fang Xingjian clenched his fists tightly, planning to kill her. However, the scene of Li Shuanghua charging over furiously with a distorted expression did not happen as he had imagined. Under Fang Xingjian's surprised gaze, he saw that Li Shuanghua's expression was calm. There were no hints of the other specter's fury and hatred. Instead, she nodded toward Feng Xingjian. "You've done well. You're better than me." A faint sigh rang out in Feng Xingjian's heart. Feng Xingjian's body trembled slightly, but Li Shuanghua had already turned to leave, disappearing from the world in the blink of an eye. There was astonishment and doubt in Feng Xingjian's eyes. He did not move and punched out toward the right, turning another large area of specters into dregs. His martial will reached 1,112 points. At this moment, the entire heaven-connecting sword physique felt extremely full. It was as if each hint of power had risen to a limit. As this limit was reached, the will gradually started to change, turning into an existence that was like flesh and blood. Feng Xingjian continued to charge and kill amidst the army of the dead. As more and more specters were crushed by him, they turned into waves of pure power and surged toward him. Feng Xingjian's martial will became increasingly stronger and more full, gradually producing a change to flesh and blood. His martial will started to transform into flesh and blood. As he punched out one last time, all the specters at the first tier of the 9-tiered heavens were killed. Feng Xingjian appeared to have completely materialized, and his entire body had turned from martial will into flesh and blood. However, it was just a layer of flesh and skin. He only had his martial will here and no physical power. The transformation between his will and physical body was still not perfect, but at least there was a start. The first tier of the 9-tiered heavens has been completed. I've reached the second tier of the divine level and risen to level 31. I now have the ability to transform my will and physical body. Feng Xingjian looked at his stats window. It had become Name Feng Xingjian, age 19, occupation Eternal Sword Seigneur level 31 strength, 526 agility, 524 reaction, 429 endurance, 410 flexibility. For 09 martial will 150 skills, techniques, sword prowess, sword force. Level 50 celestial eradication, sword formation. Level 50 celestial eradication, sword technique. Before him, the first tier of the 9-tiered heavens had already disappeared, as if it would never appear again. It had once again turned into a stretch of pitch-black outer space. He lifted his head, and seething ether particles appeared above his head. It was the second tier of the 9-tiered heavens, which still encompassed him and the entire miracle world. Each time a divine level expert cleared a tier of the 9-tiered heavens, they would no longer be able to see it. It was as if there was some kind of authority in the world. In his mind, Li Shuanghua's earlier words were still echoing. Did I do better than you? Just as Feng Xingjian was cultivating his martial arts, condensing his will, and advancing to the second tier of the divine level. In the hill where Xingwang Mountain was located, a young man was walking toward the Myriad Stars Palace. The young man had a head of thick black hair, and he gave off a leisurely aura. He wore coarse hem clothes, making him look like a farmer from the countryside. He also gave off a pure and sincere aura, making others have a good impression of him. Arriving at the foot of Xingwang Mountain, the young man smiled and looked at the great mountain before him. He then asked the people queuing up at the side, "Is this Xingwang Mountain?" Right now, there were many more people queuing up at the foot of Xingwang Mountain, waiting to be summoned. Other than Maria and her father, the leaders of various influences and factions had all arrived. They had rushed to Xingwang Mountain to request to meet Feng Xingjian. Right now, Feng Xingjian had shaken up the Xingwu region, and there was no one who did not know of him. After sweeping through the Myriad Stars Palace, it was rumored that he had met and conversed with the astral ancestor. These factions in the Xingwu region were naturally extremely concerned about the specific situation. Maria's father even wanted to let Maria acknowledge Feng Xingjian as her master to see if he would be willing to take her in as his disciple. Hearing the young man's words, a middle-aged man said impatiently, "You're also here to request to meet Lord Feng Xingjian, right? Queue up at the back. Don't cut the queue." Requesting to meet Feng Xingjian, the young man smiled, feeling that it was a little funny. He turned his head and suddenly looked at Crystal, who was still kneeling down. After Crystal was forced to kneel by Fang Xingjian's deathly sword intent, she had been in this position for the past few days. The Lone Star Knight and the others did not dare to help her stand up. For the past few days, they could only watch as she knelt in front of the mountain and was watched by countless people. The young man looked at Crystal, who had a pale countenance and hollow eyes. He smiled and asked, "What's wrong with her?" "She offended Lord Fang Xingjian," the middle-aged man said. "Brat, what are you here for?" The young man rubbed his nose, feeling a little embarrassed. Then he said, "I'm here to kill the astral ancestor." Chapter 636. I'm here to beat the astral ancestor to death. Hearing the young man's words, the middle-aged man's countenance changed, and he took a few steps back. He looked at the young man, as if he was looking at a lunatic. Just then, a graceful young married lady of about 30 years of age walked over. The young married lady was wrapped in a mink coat and a pair of leather pants. The leather pants wrapped tightly around her long and slender legs, outlining her beautiful figure. "I'm sorry, my younger brother is young and likes to spout nonsense." The young married lady smiled at the middle-aged man, who nodded. However, he clearly did not wish to bother with this arrogant young man and left quickly. When the young man saw the young married lady, he smiled warmly. "Sister Titan, I'm not spouting nonsense." The long-legged young married lady who was addressed as Titan shook her head helplessly and said, "Tiandao, it's not a big deal that you wanted to kill the astral ancestor to take revenge for what happened 15 years ago. But now that Fang Xingjian is on Xingwang Mountain, let's do it next time." The young man and young married lady were the two remaining divine-level experts on Earth, Tiandao and Titan. Hearing Titan's words, Tiandao's smile appeared warm and bashful. He touched his head and said, "I'm only going to kill the astral ancestor. I won't do anything to Fang Xingjian." Titan frowned and crossed her beautiful legs before continuing. "Fang Xingjian has killed the undying Xia. His abilities are probably on par with the astral ancestor. It's too dangerous for you to go up the mountain alone and take on the two of them at the same time." From what Titan said, it was clear that the news of Fang Xingjian wreaking havoc in the Full Moon Shrine and crippling the first prince over 10 days ago had yet to reach their ears. After all, their roots were not in Miracle World, and they had just arrived in the Empire. They did not have a powerful information network here. "Is it dangerous?" Tiandao smiled and touched his nose, saying, "But I still want to give it a try. 15 years ago, the astral ancestor almost crippled me. I can't just let this go." Titan sighed and wanted to continue persuading him, but Tiandao said, "Sister Titan, 1 month ago, when I was cultivating in the Tower of Time, I challenged Elnoworth." Hearing Tiandao's words, Titan's countenance changed. "Elnoworth? He is the personal disciple that the Gold Mage King dotes on the most. It's said that he reached the divine level a long time ago and is able to perform black magic of level 10 and above. Why did you think of challenging him?" However, she immediately reacted. Looking at Tiandao's current appearance, she said, "You succeeded? Not bad." Tiandao was still as shy as a junior high school student. He scratched the back of his head and said, "While the Gold Mage King and the other experts were preparing for the evil god summoning ritual, I killed Elnoworth and snatched his crystal of time." This time, there was true astonishment in Titan's eyes. "You actually killed Elnoworth? So now you—" "I escaped." Tiandao smiled and said, "You know that the Gold Robe faction specializes in controlling time and has very few people to begin with. After I snatched the Crystal of Time, there aren't many people who can capture me unless the Gold Mage King comes personally. I'm not considered the astral ancestor. As for Fang Xingjian, it's very amazing that he killed Xia, who was at the 2nd tier of the divine level. However, for the first 6 tiers of the divine level, other than some special jobs or black magic, no one else is able to control time. To me, this is nothing much." Hearing Tiandao's words, Titan let out a soft exhale, as if wanting to swallow all of her astonishment. She said slowly, "In that case, you've completely offended the Gold Mage King. That's nothing." A flush flashed on Tiandao's face, and he was like a child who had been praised. Sister Titan, we cultivate martial arts for our own sake. With the Crystal of Time, I already have the ability to contend for the world. What I lack now is a good physical body. The physical bodies of Magic Prince Knights are still a little weaker than those of knights. Do you think that I came here in such a hurry to look for the astral ancestor, to take revenge for what happened back then? I'm not that petty. I came here for the sake of the astral ancestor's physical body. He's a veteran divine level knight, and has even cultivated the myriad stars palace's conjured physique, the astral spiritual conjured physique. After I perform the time rebirth technique and seize his physical body, I'll be able to make up for the weakness of my physical body and strive for the second tier of the divine level. I can even make use of the Crystal of Time's powers to strive for the third tier of the divine level. By then, even if the Gold Mage King were to come personally, he might not be able to capture me. Titan took a long look at Tiandao. In his pure gaze, she could not see any hint of evil or selfishness. It was as if what he was talking about was just eating and drinking. Tiandao's character of turning the pursuit of power and cultivation into his instincts was a unique character that Tiandao had had since he was young. However, Titan still shook her head. Even if no one on Xingwang Mountain is a match for you, it's still not right to offend the Gold Mage King and even the Mage Association. Tiandao smiled, stroked the back of his head, and said, "Then, sister, please follow me to take a look. After all, with the Crystal of Time, the people on Xingwang Mountain are just a bunch of useless people." Titan heaved a sigh. The two figures flashed and already disappeared. In Miracle World, divine-level Magic Prince Knights could directly absorb diabolic energy and perform black magic without any reservations. They were over 100 times stronger than they were on Earth. It was just like how even the first prince had been unable to do anything to a divine-level mage like the World Annihilation Heavenly Lord back then. Only people like Feng Xingjian, who were immune to black magic and had outstanding abilities, could go up against them. Right now, Titan and Tiandao had barged into Xingwang Mountain as if there was no one there. Just by sending out their martial wills and blinding the five senses, no one would be able to discover them. A short moment later, they found the astral ancestor's bedroom. Tiandao kicked open the door and saw the astral ancestor lying on the bed with his eyes closed. Beside him were the Lone Star Knight, the Stardust Fairy, and the Star Beast Hunter, who were looking at the astral ancestor with great concern. Just as Tiandao kicked them away, the three of them came over at the same time. The Star Beast Hunter was enraged. "Who allowed you guys to come in?" Tiandao ignored him. Instead, he wore a shy smile and looked at the astral ancestor, who was lying on the bed. Tiandao said a little embarrassedly, "To think that you're injured? It seems that even the heavens are on my side." With that, he walked toward the astral ancestor as if he did not see the Star Beast Hunter, the Lone Star Knight, and the Stardust Fairy. The three of them let out a cold snort and were about to make a move to stop him when a young man before them suddenly appeared next to the astral ancestor with a flash. Simultaneously, an intense pain was felt, and the heads of the three of them suddenly exploded. They fell to the ground, twitching and regenerating incessantly. "The dust particles in the air just need to remain silent," Tiandao said calmly. Then he grabbed out toward the astral ancestor's head, and streams of vortexes extended out from his palm, encompassing toward the astral ancestor. Chapter 637. Then time came to a standstill once again. When time resumed, the light needles that were formed from the martial will suddenly shattered, and the astral ancestor was once again dealt with serious injuries. The remaining powers turned into a distorted black hole that encompassed Tiandao. Overwhelming and majestic powers gushed out. The powers of the astral ancestor, who had condensed the astral spiritual physique and was at the second tier of the divine level, were far too powerful. It was impossible for his martial will to exist eternally. It would also age with the passing of time. It was just that it would age at a much slower rate than the physical body. Wherever the light needles passed by, the space would distort and light rays would bend. They smashed onto Tiandao's golden will along with their powers, crazily shattering Tiandao's protective golden will. Tiandao once again gained the upper hand. Thankfully, the strength of his will isn't strong enough to withstand 1 second of my attacks when he's defenseless. Otherwise, it'll be more troublesome. Tiandao looked at the scattering light spots in the sky, and the corners of his lips curled up into a savage smile. What's going on? My strength should be stronger than him. As the fist shadows encompassed the entire body of the astral ancestor, a myriad of punches landed on his defenseless body. Tiandao's attacks, in particular, completely targeted the astral ancestor's will and almost did not cause any physical damage. As Tiandao's palm slapped down, a feeling of time accelerating and everything in the universe changing at a rapid speed encompassed the astral ancestor. A gravitational singularity appeared on Tiandao's body. After a few consecutive failures, the astral ancestor seemed to react and looked at Tiandao in surprise and doubt. After all, the astral ancestor's cultivation was above Tiandao's. With this attack, he instantly regained the upper hand, causing Tiandao to be only able to defend and not retaliate. In that instant, the entire world seemed to have come to a standstill. The crystal of time had been activated. I mustn't go on like this. Venturing out with the will to strive for the nine-tiered heavens? At the next moment, Tiandao's marshal will scan the other party's body, and his expression instantly became extremely brutal and fanatical. Go look for Feng Xingjian. He should be able to make a move. At the very least, he'll be able to help me stall for time. However, the astral ancestor was worthy of being an expert who had strived for Tier 3 of the divine level. Although he had sustained serious injuries from succumbing to qi deviation, Feng Xingjian's attack, and Tiandao's withering of time, after his martial will was shattered, it turned into the scene of the Milky Way. Each light spot jumped about, trembled, and at the next moment, they pierced toward Tiandao like many light needles. This was a Tier 2 divine level expert, moving at akin to light speed. I have to find an opportunity. At the very least, I have to figure out his abilities. This was a magic treasure that the Gold Mage King had expended countless materials and endless powers to forge for his personal disciple. At this moment, it displayed a terrifying prowess. At the moment it was activated, the entire world before Tiandao seemed to slow down to an extreme. It was as if the entire world had come to a standstill. It's useless. But in the next moment, his eyes suddenly opened, and a myriad of starlight flickered in his eyes. It was as if the universe was revolving, and the galaxy was born and destroyed. Level 10 Black Magic, Withering of Time. Each light needle brought along heavy gravitational forces. With Tiandao's body as the center, they attracted all the light needles to pierce out like meteors. Titan watched the battle between Tiandao and the astral ancestor. Both of them were divine-level experts, and although their powers were so powerful that they could distort space during the battle, not too much of it leaked out. Other than turning the houses within a range of several hundred meters into dust, even the mountains did not explode. This is gold element black magic. This kind of ability to control time is really terrifying. Gold faction magic prince knights would probably have very few opponents at the same level as them. Amidst the standstill in time, Tiandao had already caught up. Even though he was a Tier 2 divine level expert moving at akin to light speed, he was still unable to shake off Tiandao, who was 1 second ahead of others. Many thoughts and guesses flashed in the astral ancestor's mind. However, the time was too short, and he had no time to think at all. His will was once again shattered by the myriad of golden fist light. Before him was Feng Xingjian, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, as well as Lan Yu, who was standing next to him to protect him. After clearing up the chaotic memories, the astral ancestor instantly reorganized his martial will, opened his eyes, and smashed the astral river with his palm. Bringing along endless gravitational forces, the overwhelming darkness smashed out toward Tiandao. Seeing that Tiandao, who was at Tier 1 of the divine level, was completely suppressing the astral ancestor, a hint of astonishment flashed in Titan's eyes. The astral ancestor clearly had powers that surpassed Tiandao's, yet he was unable to retaliate at all. To ordinary people, a single second of stillness was like a fleeting flash. However, to a divine-level expert like Tiandao, 1 second was far too long. This was the power of the Crystal of Time. It could accelerate the user's time, causing the entire world to seem as if time had come to a standstill. Under this palm, the astral ancestors will seem as if several years or several decades had passed. It was as if he would turn into ashes at any moment. This happened a few times consecutively. Each time the astral ancestor condensed his martial will to attack or defend, he would only be able to maintain it for 1 second at most. After 1 second, he would be completely shattered by Tiandao. The golden martial will then started burning fiercely on his body. Then it turned into countless golden fist shadows and smashed out toward the astral ancestor like a myriad of meteors, smashing toward the weak points of his power. With a palm strike, the 1/1,000,000th of the power turned into repercussions and struck the air. However, it still turned all the buildings within a range of several hundred meters into dust. How on earth did he do that? All right, but who dares to snatch my physical body? Dong, 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 dong. This meant that Tiandao, who possessed the Crystal of Time, could enter a second of stillness every second. In battle, Tiandao would have twice the amount of free time compared to his opponent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. What majestic vital energy in blood. What a rare aptitude. It's 10 times or even 100 times more perfect than the astral ancestor's physical body. It's useless. Right now, Tiandao no longer looked like his usual bashful and innocent self. Once he started fighting, the corners of his lips would maintain a savage smile. He was like a crazed killer, bringing along waves of blatant killing intent as he looked at the astral ancestor like he was looking at his prey. However, the corners of Tiandao's lips curled up into a hint of a smile. Golden martial will gushed out from his body, and under his clothes, a piece of crystal hung around his neck emitted golden flames. Although sound could not be transmitted in this stillness, as the many golden fist lights smashed onto the astral ancestor's body, it was as if the sounds of attacks could be heard ringing out. The entire world seemed to have come to a standstill at this moment. Although Tiandao's withering of time had dealt the astral ancestor with serious injuries, it had also indirectly helped the astral ancestor clear up the messy memories in his mind. The astral ancestor had been regenerating his will, which had been dealt a serious blow by Fang Xingjian. However, due to the chaotic memories that had been entangled in his body when he had entered a state of frenzy, his regeneration speed was very slow. Suddenly, the astral ancestor recalled the memories from before and after he had fainted. Fang Xingjian's silhouette appeared in his mind. At the next second, time returned to normal, and the martial will inside and outside the astral ancestor shattered with a loud bang, turning into a myriad of light spots that scattered in the air. However, his physical body was unscathed, and he froze on the spot like a walking corpse. After having his will shattered several times consecutively, his majestic powers also became weaker. The astral ancestor's physical body shattered with a loud bang, and he instantly appeared several kilometers away. Why is it that he's able to instantly break through my moves every single time, hitting the weak points of my powers, and then shattering my martial will? This sort of stillness in time could be maintained for 1 second, and then it would need to cool down for 1 second before it could be performed again. Regardless of whether it was the Lone Star Knight and the other two who were in the midst of regenerating, or the astral ancestor who had sent out a palm strike and whose martial will had frozen in midair. In an instant, Tiandao had already bypassed the astral ancestor's body and darted out fiercely toward Fang Xingjian's physical body. Good physical body. It's really a good physical body. I want it. This was how Tiandao wanted to destroy the other party's will and then use the time rebirth technique to seize the other party's physical body. Once again, Tiandao struck out with the astral river shattering, and darkness surged out. The mountains within a range of 100 meters trembled as if they were going to be sucked into the air. However, just as a portion of Tiandao's will was destroyed, the astral ancestor's will was once again shattered. The withering of time could accelerate the weakening of one's martial will and deplete the other party's lifespan, instantly turning the other party's consciousness into dust while leaving the physical body unharmed. Looking at Feng Xinjian, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, golden light burst out from his eyes. Before the long river of time, everything is just dust. You're no exception. Chapter 638. Just as Tiandao passed by the astral ancestor's body and smashed fiercely toward Feng Xinjian, a deep blue light appeared before him. It was Lan Yu's martial will that struck out from the side like a material city wall, intercepting Tiandao's actions. A rumble seemed to ring out in void space, and layers of twisted wave shot out from the collision between the two, instantly sinking the platform within a range of 100 meters by 1 meter. This was only because both parties had extremely exquisite control over their powers, and there were very few repercussions from their attacks. Tiandao's savage smile deepened after his attack was fended off. When he saw Lan Yu, a hint of astonishment flashed in his eyes. However, what kind of character was he? He was an expert who had devoted almost his entire life to martial arts. When he saw Lan Yu, he was merely surprised by her beauty. Then he looked at Lan Yu and the astral ancestor, who were surrounding him from the front and the back. He smiled and said, "Why? Are the two of you thinking of surrounding and attacking me?" As he spoke, Titan appeared. Her pair of long and slender legs, which were wrapped in leather pants, appeared even sexier. She stepped lightly on the shattered rocks, just like the sexy dance steps of a dancer. She appeared before everyone just like that, calmly facing the two divine-level experts' questioning gazes. It was as if she did not care about Lan Yu and the astral ancestor at all. Taking a glance at Titan, Tiandao smiled and said, "Sister Titan, don't take action later on. I wish to deal with them personally." Titan frowned, and there seemed to be a hint of eagerness in her eyes. These are two divine-level experts. What's the difference between one or two specks of dust in the air? Sensing the endless mysterious powers coming from the crystal of time, the bloodthirsty gleam in Tiandao's eyes grew increasingly intense. Right now, he was like a ferocious beast with surging murderous auras, a demon lord in hell. He no longer looked like the shy young man from before. His words came from the bottom of his heart. With the crystal of time, it was basically impossible for ordinary divine-level knights to break through this time magic. Having an extra second as compared to others not only meant that he would always be able to attack an opponent who was defenseless, but he would also always have an extra second to escape. Moreover, other than the crystal of time, he also had the black magic that he had cultivated diligently. After all, he had relied on his own strength to defeat Elnoworth, who possessed the crystal of time. Putting aside Lan Yu and the astral ancestor, even if there were to be Feng Xinjian, who was in the midst of his cultivation, Tiandao would not take them hard at all. At the same time, the astral ancestor and Lan Yu also kept on communicating through their martial will, and countless pieces of information instantly intersected. Lan Yu snorted coldly and said, "What's going on? Who is this kid?" The astral ancestor said, "I don't know, but he seems to be able to perform black magic and has the aura of a mage. Be careful. This guy's ability is very strange." Lan Yu smiled coldly. "You lured him over yourself, yet you still have the nerve to tell us to be careful. Do you think I don't know what you're planning?" This was clearly not the first time the astral ancestor had met Lan Yu. He knew that although this junior appeared to be beautiful and alluring, she was not very broad-minded and held a lot of grudges. He could only helplessly say, "Don't underestimate this kid. His ability is very strange. Even if the two of us work together, I'm afraid we might not be able to gain the upper hand." "He's that powerful?" Lan Yu did not really believe it. The astral ancestor immediately transmitted all the information regarding his exchange with Tiandao to Lan Yu. After Lan Yu saw it, her expression instantly turned solemn. This ability could be time? Just then, Tiandao's voice also entered their ears. Lan Yu's eyes narrowed, and her martial will that was the color of moonlight pounced out toward Tiandao like a tsunami. You're alone? Dealing with the two of us? Who do you think you're talking to? Simultaneously, the astral ancestor also made a move, striking out with a punch. The power of his physical body and martial will merge together, and gravitational waves stacked up crazily. When this punch struck out, it filled up the world. It was as if a huge star had suddenly appeared, striking out toward Tiandao. The moment Lan Yu made her move, she condensed her martial will into a star and struck out with her full moon palm. It was as if a moon had descended, wanting to collide with the ground and completely destroy the world. The astral ancestor made his move. Stars plunged down like meteors, bringing along endless gravitational forces and prowess as they smashed out toward Tiandao. The moment the two of them made their moves, they had great tacit understanding. Two gushes of power, one on the left and one on the right, were like two stars colliding. They sent a terrifying power crushing toward every inch of space where Tiandao was. Spatial distortions instantly took up an area within a range of 100 meters. Wherever they passed by, there would be a feeling of endless fog. It was as if time and space were in a mess, and the world was distorted. With the two divine-level experts joining forces, such a ferocious power caused even Titan, who was watching from the side, to shudder in fear. However, Tiandao, who was in the center of the attacks, did not panic at all. He finally displayed his abilities, which allowed him to escape from the gold-robed mages, to descend upon Xingwang Mountain, and to suppress two divine-level experts. The Crystal of Time was activated, and the world once again fell into a state of stillness. However, this time around, Tiandao did not attack anyone. Instead, he released his second black magic in this silent space. It was the level 9 black magic, Gracefulness of Time. As golden light flashed crazily, layers of transparent ripples encompassed the area within a range of 100 meters. Back in the Earth's Federation, Shan Kong had performed this black magic before. However, now that it was being performed by Tiandao, its power far surpassed everyone's imagination. Within a range of 100 meters, the transmission speed of all the powers that attacked Tiandao was pulled down to 1 meter per second under the effect of diabolic energy. When time resumed its flow, the astral ancestors and Lan Yu's eyes were filled with disbelief. Their will attacks, which had been launched at light speed, were now only able to move 1 meter at a time toward Tiandao, even though they were accompanied by surging powers. What kind of joke is this? What kind of black magic is this? Speed was power. When any attack was slowed down to such an extent, it would become a joke no matter how terrifying it was. Lan Yu did not believe it and struck out her palm once again. Putting aside her martial will, even the strong gales brought up by the power of her punches and kicks were moving forward at a speed of 1 meter per second. The astral ancestor also made a move. However, regardless of whether it was his fist transmuting stars, astral shattering rivers, or even gravitational waves, pure strong gales from his punches and kicks, or the pressure from his martial will, all of them could only move at a speed of 1 meter per second. Tiandao easily dodged the attacks before him. Looking at their astonished gazes, he smiled and said, "You guys have exchanged blows with mages in the past as well, right? 20 years ago, the Empire even wiped out the Serene Shrine. However, there are also differences between the 12 factions of mages' black magic. The gray robe mages are just a bunch of stray dogs who have been chased out by other mages from the Mage Association. What you divine level knights have to rely on leveling up step by step in order to achieve, we can rely on black magic to achieve at the first tier of the divine level. This is where the difference between knights and mages lies." Chapter 639. At the next moment, the Crystal of Time was activated, and time stopped for a second before resuming its flow. The astral ancestors and Lan Yu's martial wills exploded, turning into countless flashes of light. However, this time around, the attacking prowess of the two divine-level experts within a second had decreased by a lot. The astral ancestor was still able to retain a portion of his martial will, turning into a phantom image that floated in midair. His countenance changed drastically as he looked at Tiandao. Almost all of his attacks were ineffective, and Tiandao was even able to perform attacks that he could not block or dodge. How was he supposed to fight against this? Therefore, his physical body shattered, and he turned into a series of light shadows, wanting to escape using the Tier 2 divine-level ability that was akin to light speed. However, the astral ancestor discovered in despair that the movement of his martial will could only maintain a speed of 1 meter per second. He could not hit Tiandao, defend against it, or escape. At this moment, Tiandao truly displayed the prowess of black magic. Under the astral ancestors and Lan Yu's despairing gazes, Tiandao slowly walked toward Feng Xingjian. This is the true prowess of black magic. The astral ancestors' eyes were filled with astonishment. I originally heard that the Mage Association has a power that can go up against the Holy Sea of Truth, and that black magic holds the method to destroy the world. I thought that it was just a rumor. It seems that the prowess of black magic is probably far beyond my imagination. Lan Yu's eyes were also filled with disbelief. This magic is too powerful. We're not his match at all. Even if Feng Xingjian joins forces with us, we won't be a match for him, let alone us. How can there be such a terrifying power in this world? How can we win against an opponent like this? They were not the only ones. Titan was even more astonished. Gold-robed black magic, as expected of the most unfathomable type of magic among the 12 factions. If Tiandao is already so powerful, then how powerful would the gold-robed mage king be? And how powerful would the strongest mage in the association, the black mage king, be? Titan let out a breath and sighed. As expected, the Mage Association and the Holy Sea of Truth are the true top-notch influences in Miracle World. In comparison, the Path of Knights is too ordinary. Only by reaching the level of the Mystic Abyss, Heavenly Emperor, and the Divine Sun Emperor will one be able to go up against black magic. Concurrently, Tiandao had already walked up to Feng Xingjian. As for Lan Yu and the Astral Ancestor, he had never paid any attention to them. They were merely ants that he could kill whenever he wanted to. As Tiandao looked at Feng Xingjian, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, and sensed the powerful power contained in his body, Tiandao's eyes shone with an endless desire. With the black magic that he had mastered, as long as he took over Feng Xingjian's physical body and raised his cultivation once again, he would be able to move unhindered across the entire continent. At that time, with just 1 second of free time to attack, an existence like the Astral Ancestor would not only have his will shattered, but he would also be seriously injured. However, just then, Feng Xingjian opened his eyes slowly and looked at Tiandao with a calm expression. Lan Yu's martial will gushed out wildly toward Feng Xingjian. Be careful. He's too strong. Don't fight him head-on. The martial will contain the information of their earlier battle, and it transmitted all of it toward Feng Xingjian. However, under the encompassing effect of the gracefulness of time, this gush of information was also moving meter by meter, unable to be transmitted into Feng Xingjian's mind immediately. Therefore, under Lan Yu's despaired gaze, Tiandao lowered his head and once again broke into a shy smile. Can you hand your physical body over to me? Right now, Tiandao was not fighting. He seemed to have once again become that shy and bashful young boy. However, Feng Xingjian looked at Tiandao expressionlessly. Through his sudden inspiration, he did not sense any danger at all. Feng Xingjian looked at Tiandao, sensed his aura, and glanced at the layers of golden magic prints under Tiandao's clothes. Feng Xingjian said calmly, Tiandao, or Titan? Tiandao scratched the back of his head and said a little embarrassedly, I'm Tiandao. At the next moment, he smiled. I'll be accepting your physical body. Thank you. With that, as the astral ancestor and Lan Yu's despaired gazes, the entire world came to a standstill once again. Tiandao slapped out his palm toward Fang Xingjian's head. This palm strike was accompanied by another level 10 black magic, the Withering of Time. Simultaneously, Tiandao's golden martial will turned into a myriad of fist light that smashed out toward Fang Xingjian. He unleashed his full power right from the start, wanting to crush Fang Xingjian's martial will into dust. He wanted to shatter Fang Xingjian's martial will and accelerate the Withering of Time to the point where Fang Xingjian was completely annihilated. He then wanted to use the Time Resurgence art to seize Fang Xingjian's physical body, causing Fang Xingjian's physical body to be perfectly compatible with his will. All the attacks were completed within 1 second. Time resumed its flow once again, and the effects of the attacks appeared. Under the repercussive waves of the attacks, the air started to undulate like ocean waves. Amidst loud, rumbling sounds, circles of ripples swept out. Under this attack, that was purely targeting the will, almost all the animals within a range of 1,000 meters were killed from the tremors. Even Lan Yu's and the astral ancestors' countenances turned pale. However, Tiandao's countenance turned extremely grim. He felt that when his golden will struck out, it was like a piece of wood colliding against a steel plate. Not only did it not manage to blast Fang Xingjian's martial will away, but also caused his own martial will to shatter. What kind of joke is this? What conjured physique did he condense? How can it possibly be so powerful? The heaven-connecting sword physique, which Fang Xingjian had created by combining the secret arts of countless sects, had a prowess that far surpassed Tiandao's imagination. It caused him to encounter a situation that he did not wish to encounter the most. If he was unable to break through Fang Xingjian's defense, even after going all out, then it would be meaningless no matter how much time he stopped. Concurrently, Deathly Sword Intense had already encompassed Tiandao's physical body. "You're attacking me?" Sensing that Fang Xingjian's will was being used on him, Tiandao's countenance changed. "This is bad. He's immune to black magic. There's nothing he can do about the crystal of time accelerating my time. However, he won't eat the gracefulness of time's mass deceleration." However, Tiandao's expression remained calm. "It's fine. 1 second. As long as I can hold on for 1 second, it'll be fine. My martial will is at 600 points after all. 1 second is still trash." These two soft words rang out in Tiandao's mind. In 1,000th of a second, all of his golden will was crushed into dust. At the next moment, his body was engulfed by endless sword cheese and dismembered into a myriad of pieces. Putting aside the 1 second cooling time, Tiandao had not even been able to hold on for 1,000th of a second before he was crushed by Fang Xingjian. Even the crystal of time was crushed. "No!" Sensing that the crystal of time had been crushed, Tiandao bellowed furiously, "Fang Xingjian, look at what you've done." However, Fang Xingjian tapped out across space once again, and Tiandao's golden will exploded once again. Tiandao's attitude immediately changed, and his tone became softer. "Wait a minute, Fang Xingjian. Wait a moment. Trash." With a loud boom, Tiandao's will shattered inch by inch and was once again engulfed by endless sword cheese. When the myriad of sword cheese dissipated, his will had also disappeared. He had died completely. Throughout the entire process, Tiandao had not even been able to hold on for a second. Titan, the astral ancestor, and Lan Yu were all dumbstruck. Chapter 640. The astral ancestor was the most astonished to see Fang Xingjian casually kill the young man before him in less than a second. It was because he was the one who had fought against Tiandao the longest out of the three of them. Therefore, he knew how terrifying Tiandao was. With the astral ancestor's great power, his accumulations as a divine-level expert, and his various exciting experiences, it was sufficient for him to write over 10 biographies. Having reached Tier 2 of the divine level, and even had hopes of striving for Tier 3 of the divine level, he had already thought that he was a top-notch expert in the world. He might not be comparable to the Mage Association's Mage Kings or the Guardian Kings from the Holy See of Truth, but he should still be a top-notch expert apart from them. However, Feng Xingjian and Tian Dao, who had appeared one after the other, gave him the feeling that he was a hero past his prime. This young man's abilities are extremely strange and involve the profoundness of time. His black magic is so exquisite that probably even a Tier 2 of the divine level, probably even a Tier 3 divine level expert might not be able to do anything to him. The astral ancestor looked at Feng Xingjian as if he was looking at a monster. But he was dealt with by Feng Xingjian just like that. I feel that Feng Xingjian's earlier move seemed to contain endless transformations and even the supreme profoundness of our myriad stars palace. How on earth did this person cultivate? When the difference in strength was close, one would have the urge to catch up. However, when the difference in strength was too great, it would only bring about despair. This was what the astral ancestor felt. The scene of Feng Xingjian killing Tian Dao in 1,000th of a second caused him to no longer have any desire to vie for supremacy. Titan, who was at the side, was also astonished. Her pair of beautiful legs were pressed together tightly, and her delicate body was trembling. She looked at Feng Xingjian with a gaze filled with terror. Is he really immune to black magic? The Crystal of Time's time stop was created by accelerating Tian Dao. Therefore, Feng Xingjian wasn't able to break through it. However, Feng Xingjian wasn't affected by the gracefulness of time's acceleration at all. Titan had seen the entire process clearly. He felt a deep fear towards Feng Xingjian's ability to be immune to black magic. Initially, I thought that his immunity to black magic was just a false rumor, or that he had a special physique that allowed him to be immune to a portion of low-level black magic. But by the looks of it, he can really ignore black magic? Why would such an existence exist in this world? Is this person really the natural enemy of all mages and magic prince knights? At this moment, when Titan saw Feng Xingjian looking at her, she couldn't muster up any will to resist. She knew that in terms of battle prowess, she was no match for Feng Xingjian. Feng Xingjian's cold gaze swept past Titan, and he said indifferently, "And who are you?" "Titan, Yellow Faction Magic Prince Knight." Titan said honestly, "The gold robe represents time, while the yellow robe represents evolution." The relationship between the mages and Magic Prince Knights from both factions isn't bad. That's why I came here together with Tian Dao. Feng Xingjian nodded and said, "You're not going to resist. You're extremely powerful, and your sword arts cultivation is unrivaled in the world. If I were to resist, I probably wouldn't be able to last for more than a second. I still have this bit of self-awareness." Titan first said some nice things, then changed the topic and said, "But no matter how strong your martial arts are, you are still weak. The royal family, aristocrats, sex. Are you going to offend the Mage Association as well?" She knew that it was useless to resist with violence, so she could only use both the carrot and the stick. She would first praise Feng Xingjian and then bring out the Mage Association's name, hoping that Feng Xingjian would have some reservations. However, Feng Xingjian waved his hand and said calmly, "There's no need for you to use the Mage Association to pressure me. If Tian Dao wants to kill me, I'll still kill him even if the Black Mage King comes to protect him. You didn't make a move, so even if there's no one to protect you, I won't kill you casually." Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, Titan exhaled softly. It was only then that she realized that she had broken out in cold sweat. The pressure that Feng Xingjian had brought her was far too tremendous. However, Feng Xingjian said, "Although you didn't make a move, you still have the intention to harm others. I'll just give you a small punishment." Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, Titan's countenance changed, and she retreated rapidly. In the blink of an eye, she had already passed through the entire Xingwang Mountain. However, Feng Xingjian's extremely faint voice still rang out next to her ears. "Are you able to escape?" At the next moment, layers of sword intense came from void space, piercing into her body. Titan let out an agonizing cry. She felt as if her body had been pierced through by countless metal needles, and she dropped to the ground. Titan sensed her body and discovered that there were waves of invisible sword intents piercing into her body. When she took a deeper look, she could see that these waves of sword intents were formed from extremely tiny longswords. The words infiltrating void, light pursuit, all-conquering, and instant were engraved on the longswords, and they exuded waves of overwhelming killing aura. Titan used her martial will to clash against these sword intents, but she let out another agonizing cry. Not only did she not manage to crush the sword intents, but her martial will was also shattered by the backlash. Right now, Fang Xingjian's martial will, deathly sword intent, and after condensing the heaven-connecting sword physique, they were all formed from the heaven-connecting sword physique. His extremely cold voice rang out in her ears. This is the heaven-connecting sword physique that I've just condensed. Bring it back and let the Mage Kings have a good look. If you can't even break through my sword physique, then don't come to my territory. Otherwise, you won't even know how you died. That would be too unjust. Titan's countenance was pale, and she took a long look at Fang Xingjian. The Mage Association's strength far surpasses your imagination. Fang Xingjian shook his head. Titan's beauty seemed to be unable to leave any trace in his heart. With a wave of his hand, violent power supported Titan like a gentle palm, sending her flying. Scram! Titan instantly turned into a black dot and disappeared into the sky. The direction in which she had disappeared was where the Uranless Federation was located. With a single move, Fang Xingjian sent Titan flying back to the city where the Mage Association was located. After dealing with Titan, he turned to look at the astral ancestor and Lanyu. Looking at the astral ancestor, Fang Xingjian nodded. You've recovered? That's good. You and Lanyu can discuss this. When the second prince comes out from seclusion, we'll support him to become the king. I'll get people to rush over from the great western region and take over the influences here. Seeing how the astral ancestor seemed to want to say something, Fang Xingjian waved his hand and said magnanimously, Don't worry. I'm not trying to seize your authority. It's just for everyone to meet each other, get familiar with each other, and consolidate the powers under your control. This will save you from being taken down one by one when I'm not around. Lanyu asked puzzledly, You're leaving? That's right. There's something that I need, and it's time for me to retrieve it. Several days later, in the Uranless Federation's Phantom City, the Black Mage King stroked his chin, looked at Fang Xingqian, then looked at the mage who was kneeling before him, as well as the unconscious Titan who was lying next to him. He said, F***CK. When you were training, this chick suddenly descended from the sky. Chapter 641. Fang Xingqian, who was at the side, looked different from before. The two small bumps on his head had now grown into a pair of long, curved horns, and a long tail had grown out from the back of his spine. He looked just like a demon. As a red-robed mage, this was his cultivation method. Compared to the mages of the other factions, the red-robed mage's cultivation was to continuously change their state, allowing them to get closer and closer to the legendary Red Evil God. The mages of the 12 factions had different black magic for each faction, and the evil gods they worshipped were also completely different. The red-robed mage's cultivation was to gradually evolve from a human into a red evil god. Their external appearance, strength, structure, and mental state would all keep on getting closer to the red evil god. Right now, Fang Xingqian looked increasingly inhuman. This also meant that his cultivation was improving at a godly rate. This was all caused by Fang Xingjian's stimulation. At the thought of how Fang Xingjian had killed the undying Xia and how his cultivation was approaching that of a Tier 2 divine level expert, Fang Xingqian was filled with anxiety. Other than cultivating black magic day and night, there was nothing else that could alleviate the anxiety in his heart. Hearing the Black Mage King's question, the mage who was kneeling down said, Sir, I was praying to the gods at the altar at the periphery of the Phantom City when this lady suddenly flew down from midair and crashed into the ground. I probed and found that she seems to be a divine level expert. That's why I immediately sent her over for you to examine. The Black Mage King assessed Titan's wonderful figure and beautiful face, frowned, and said, "This girl seems to be from Earth?" Fang Xingchen nodded. As an important member of the Fang clan, he naturally recognized this divine-level expert from Earth. "It's Titan. She seems to be seriously injured. I wonder who was able to injure her to such an extent." The corners of the Black Mage King's lips curled up. "This is really interesting. There are over 10 to 20 streams of sword intense in her body, suppressing her to the point where she can't move." Just as they were discussing, Titan's eyelashes trembled, and she let out a series of long moans as she woke up. The moment she woke up, she felt the violent, deathly sword intense in her body, and she let out an agonizing cry. Fang Xingchen walked up to her and asked, "Titan, what on earth happened?" Titan lifted his head and looked at Fang Xingjian, then looked at the Black Mage King in the distance. He exhaled and said, "Tian Dao and I encountered Fang Xingjian. Tian Dao was killed by him, and I was sent flying from the Xingwu region to the Phantom City with a single sword attack." When Fang Xingjian heard the name Fang Xingjian, his eyes immediately flashed with hatred. When he heard that Fang Xingjian had killed Tian Dao and even sent Titan flying from the Xingwu region to the Phantom City, Fang Xingchen was both shocked and infuriated. "Are you kidding me? How far was this place from Xingwu province? Did he just slash you over from there? How is this possible?" "That is the truth." Titan exhaled and said, "Fang Xingjian's strength is too terrifying. I think that the association must pay more attention to him in the future." Fang Xingchen said, unconvinced, "It's true that he is very powerful and is also the target that I'm pursuing. However, you're thinking too highly of him if you want the association to place their attention on him." Titan shook her head, seeming to recall how terrifying Fang Xingjian was. Astonishment flashed in her eyes. "This news should have been concealed by the gold robe mages for now, but you guys will probably find out about it soon. Tian Dao killed Elnoworth, stole the Crystal of Time, and then went to the Xingwang Mountain to challenge the Astral Ancestor. However, he was killed by Fang Xingjian with a single sword attack." "What?" Fang Xingchen's eyes were filled with disbelief. "The Crystal of Time has the ability to accelerate by 1 second. During the acceleration, the entire world seems to be at a standstill. How can Tian Dao possibly kill Elnoworth? And how can Fang Xingjian possibly kill Tian Dao, who possesses the Crystal of Time? Unless..." Fang Xingchen seemed to have thought of something, and the expression in his eyes changed slightly. The Black Mage King continued on his behalf. "Of course it's because Tian Dao killed Elnoworth within 1 second, and then Fang Xingjian killed Tian Dao within 1 second. When I was young, there were plenty of such things. This genius today and that genius tomorrow might just die one day." Fang Xingchen's countenance changed drastically. Fang Xingjian's growth in strength had once again surpassed his expectations. Seeing the change in Fang Xingjian's countenance, the Black Mage King shook his head and said, "You're discouraged just like that? It's just killing Tian Dao. When you strive for the second tier of the divine level, who knows how many of such people you'll have to kill?" Fang Xingchen nodded and said, "I understand, Master. Although Fang Xingjian is amazing, he can't cultivate black magic and can't grasp the true essence of strength. He's still just an ant. I'll work hard to cultivate. In 1 year, or at most 2 years, I'll definitely surpass him. It's good that you're confident, but there's no need for 1 or 2 years." The Black Mage King closed his eyes, nodded, and said, "The evil god summoning ritual is about to begin. You should prepare well, and there'll be benefits. When the time comes, you'll be able to deal with Fang Xingjian however you want." Just then, the Black Mage King's gaze flickered, and a black-robed mage dashed in. "Sir, there's important news. Speak." That black-robed mage said, "Several days ago, Fang Xingjian and the first prince fought on Minghua Mountain. According to our investigations, Fang Xingjian single-handedly fought against the first prince, the Tianmen clan's enraged lion, the Full Moon Shrine's blue sacred moonlight, and Lan Yu, a total of 4 divine-level experts. Other than Lan Yu, none of them survived. With a bang, the ground under Fang Xingchen's feet exploded, and green veins popped up on his head, as if he could not believe this outcome. The Black Mage King lowered his eyes and said, "You can't hold it in anymore." Fang Xingchen said, "Master, I'm just worried that he'll affect the evil god summoning ritual." The evil god summoning ritual isn't something that he can affect. The Black Mage King lay on the reclining chair, as if he had fallen asleep. "It's just Fang Xingjian. Hold it in. The monsters you'll have to face in the future are over 100 times stronger than him." Titan's countenance turned increasingly pale, and she said in a low voice, "Sir, Fang Xingjian left behind his newly created sword intent in my body. He said that if we can't even break through his sword intent, then we shouldn't look for him and send ourselves to our deaths." "Ha ha." The Black Mage King laughed and did not say a single word, as if he did not care to argue. With a tap of his finger, a gush of thick black smoke encompassed toward Titan. However, at the next moment, the thick smoke shattered and sounds of swords humming rang out from Titan's body. She let out an agonizing cry, and blood splattered all over her body. The sword intent dissipated, but she was also seriously injured. The Black Mage King's eyes narrowed slightly, and there seemed to be a cold gleam flashing in them. There was a small wound on his finger that had just appeared, but it had already healed up. However, this scene was still seen by Fang Xingchen. To think that over 10 remnant sword intents are able to hurt Master? On the other hand, the Black Mage King stood up completely. F***CKU. Where's that be starred Fang Xingjian now? That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.